Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 1. Once again, we remind all citizens to be vigilant. The serial killer, K, who holds 13 lives, is highly likely to have infiltrated our city. We hope all citizens protect themselves, and if anything is discovered, please report it promptly. On the old TV screen on the wall, an emergency news broadcast was being temporarily inserted. The serious voice of the host came out word by word from the TV, mixed with the drizzling rain outside the window. It seemed somewhat distorted. The rich night had seeped in. The first floor of the small inn was shrouded in dim light. The light mixed with the night seeping in through the window formed a dark hue. The man standing under the light gently put down the black umbrella in his hand. The tip of the umbrella clinked on the ground. Rainwater mixed with a bright red liquid fell along the umbrella. A faint red color spread from its tip. The characteristics of the serial killer, K, are medium and thin build, about 1.82 meters tall, likes to appear on rainy nights, holds a special weapon disguised as a black umbrella. He is keen to lodge under the name of a traveler, then brutally kill the homeowner. Click. The light on the TV screen on the wall went out instantly. The sound in the inn also completely disappeared, leaving only silence. The increasingly urgent sound of raindrops outside the window became particularly noticeable. Casually throwing the remote control onto the sofa next to him, the man looked down at the two bodies lying at his feet. They were a young couple dressed very ordinarily. The dim light shone on their gradually pale and rigid faces, like two pale statues. The eyes that had lost their luster still retained the shock and fear before death. The dull pupils reflected a tall and thin man in a black trench coat. This small inn, which was not doing well in the small town, had welcomed a guest that night after a long time. This weary traveler, who was said to be sightseeing in the small town for at least a week, was the only business they had had in several days. When this young couple was hit by the sudden surprise, the emergency news suddenly started broadcasting. The guest, who looked tired but couldn't hide his elegant demeanor, slightly furrowed his brows. He elegantly and swiftly raised his black umbrella. Two living people quickly turned into corpses. The light on the TV screen dimmed, and in the dim light of the bulb, the wide open eyes of the two bodies looked increasingly terrifying. I almost exposed myself. I didn't plan to make a move. The man reflected in the pupils of both eyes frowned. His drooping gaze swept over the two rigid faces one by one. The blood on the ground gradually began to dry up, and the man who deliberately avoided all the bloodstains withdrew his gaze from the two bodies, looking around, trying to find a handy tool. I rarely take lodging seriously. After all, he would thoroughly investigate each target and prepare all the escape routes in advance. He wouldn't make a hasty move in a situation where he knew nothing, almost being counter-killed by the male host who had good combat experience. Thinking of this, the man straightened his collar that had been splashed with a few drops of blood. What a mess. This sudden accident disrupted his original plan. Now, he had to clean everything up to avoid being tracked down by those useless detectives whose brains were empty and waiting for clues to appear, ruining his supposed one-week vacation. Suddenly, a hurried footstep sounded from behind him, accompanied by the overburdened sound of the old wooden board. Creak. It was as if someone had been startled and stepped heavily on the wooden board. The man's figure suddenly paused. He held the handle of the umbrella with one hand and quickly turned around. The blood-stained umbrella tip drew a swift shadow in midair, shaking off a string of droplets. With the silent contraction of the mechanism, a pitch-black gun barrel appeared where the umbrella tip had been, pointing directly at the newcomer. Then, he was taken aback. A small figure fell on the staircase steps, his blank and hollow pupils meeting the man's deep gaze. Reflected in the boy's pupils, along with it, were the bloodstains behind the man, belonging to his parents' bodies. The sudden appearance of a child in this inn, which had no guests at all, was already clear. The outcome that was about to greet him seemed quite obvious too. The man gently lifted the tip of his umbrella. Are you Dr. Filt? Just then, the boy who had fallen on the steps suddenly stood up, feeling the wall next to him. His vacant eyes looked around for a while, finally looking in the man's direction, just slightly off. The boy's trembling voice carried a bit of surprise. He almost stumbled down the steps, nearly falling again, before finally stopping, his hands firmly supporting the wall. His vacant eyes were always looking to the side of the man. Mom said, if anyone can cure my eyes, it must be you. Have you finally come? Oh, the umbrella tip pressed down a bit. The man lightly raised his eyebrows in surprise, as if he had discovered something interesting. How do you know I came? The boy slightly widened his eyes, smiled shyly. I vaguely heard the voices of my mom and dad talking to a stranger upstairs. It's been a long time since we had any guests here. Mom said yesterday that she had already contacted you. In the other silent listening, he spoke clearly, with a bit of pride in showing his abilities in front of mature adults, finally lifting his chin slightly, revealing a big smile. So, I guessed it must be Dr. Filt who arrived. Snap. You guessed right. The man suddenly raised his hand and snapped his fingers. The black umbrella he held in his hand had somehow returned to its original state. The umbrella tip once again gently prodded the ground. He laughed softly. Smart little guy. The smile on the boy's face seemed to become even brighter because of his praise. His melancholic eyes seemed to be shining. Actually, I thought you would arrive in a few days. I didn't expect you to take the night bus. It wasn't until then that he seemed to suddenly realize that the inn was overly quiet. He couldn't help but sweep his vacant eyes from side to side. He scanned the two bodies lying quietly on the ground again, and also the man who had dragged the two bodies to one side and started cleaning the bloodstains on the ground. The boy who knew nothing about this opened his mouth in confusion. Huh. Where did Mom and Dad go? Why aren't they here to entertain you properly? That's a bit rude. No. You misunderstood. Your parents were very enthusiastic. Very enthusiastic. The man laughed, his tone a bit strange. As he spoke, he casually wiped off the last piece of bloodstain on the ground with the mop he had found. Probably seeing me coming in the rain late at night, cold and hungry, they insisted on treating me well. Then they braved the rain and went out. This is really, I didn't have time to stop them. While he was looking down at the bodies he had dragged together, thinking about how to deal with them, he answered in a polite, even elegant voice. I think you'll see them soon. Very soon, I promise. We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 2. So that's how it is. The boy, without any suspicion, spoke thoughtfully. It seems they probably went to prepare some necessary living supplies for you. As you know, we haven't had guests here for a while. With such heavy rain, I don't know when they will come back. I hope they don't get sick from the rain. A hint of worry appeared on the boy's face. Yeah, I hope they don't get lost outside, the man jokingly said as he dragged a body from beside his feet. What's that sound? The boy suddenly tilted his ear. I'm mopping the floor. The rain was so heavy that it made the floor all wet when I walked in. No, you are a guest. How can we trouble you? That would be too impolite. The boy's face showed a clear look of surprise. He instantly put his worries about his parents behind him and seemed to remember something. He said, Dr. Filt, please have a seat. Just sit on the sofa over there. Almost forgot. Would you like a cup of steaming hot milk to ward off the cold? Without waiting for an answer, he had already walked over to the reception desk, feeling his way along the wall with his hand. Unconsciously, he had walked near the reception desk, not far from the nearest body. He reached into the reception desk and fumbled around for a while, finding a clean porcelain cup and milk powder. He filled the cup with hot water from the water dispenser nearby, a movement that might seem slow to a normal person but was extremely proficient for him. He turned his body to pour in the milk powder and gently started to stir. Then, he lifted the steaming cup of milk, his hollow eyes looking in the direction where Dr. Filt probably was. He opened his mouth with a look of joy on his face, as if he wanted to share his favorite flavor with this guest. This is my favorite flavor. I drink the cup every night before going to bed to fall asleep. The steam from the milk covered the boy's eyes, and the curve of his lips was so bright and satisfied. For a blind child to be able to do these things was already extremely difficult. It was only through countless failures and accumulated experience that he had become so proficient. Even so, such actions still posed a risk of burns to him. But in the face of a doctor who could potentially cure his eyes and bring him hope, it seemed only natural to be diligent, even at the risk of getting burned. The boy took a few steps forward with the milk in his hand, intending to hand it over. Seeing his actions, the man who had just pulled out a large old tablecloth from the kitchen and was preparing to use it as a shroud, changed his expression. Almost reflexively, he put down the old tablecloth and was about to bend over after a few steps forward. A cold arm was placed in front of the boy's path. If he took a few more steps forward, he would trip and fall, and it was very likely that he would fall directly onto the lifeless body, falling into his mother's arms. This instantly broke the harmonious atmosphere between the two. However, what would his reaction be at that time? Would he scream in fright, or would he collapse? Such a scene almost quickly emerged in Kay's mind. Some indescribable stimulation made him slightly interested, and he was somewhat expectant. He who was about to move the body away immediately paused his arm and slowly straightened his waist. Dr. Filt? The raised milk was not received by anyone for a long time, and he did not hear the other party's response. The boy called out in confusion. Are you still there? I'm here. The man's voice sounded softly, with a hint of sleepiness. Sorry, I accidentally fell asleep on the sofa just now. Saying this, he raised his hand to take the cup of milk from the boy's hand. You really went to a lot of trouble. The boy shook his head and laughed shyly. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have rushed over like this. I should be the one apologizing. He quickly admonished with a serious face. By the way, you must drink the milk while it's hot. You've been out in the rain for so long, don't catch a cold. Such a serious and earnest expression on a child's face made people couldn't help but find it a bit funny. This child, who thought he was about to see the light, was smiling so brilliantly. At the same time, his parents' bodies were lying stiffly in front of him, like dead fish at the mercy of others, while the murderer was treated as a guest by him. What a ridiculous and absurd scene, yet it was inexplicably exciting. I'm indeed a bit thirsty. Thanks for the hospitality. Like a real guest, Kay smiled slightly and took a sip from the cup of milk. The dim light slowly shone in the hall. The boy, whose height had just reached the height of the reception desk, leaned against the side of the desk, smiling sweetly. The guest who had come from afar shook the water droplets off his clothes and held the hot milk, drinking it sip by sip. If one didn't look at the two bodies lying on the ground, this scene would undoubtedly be warm and harmonious. The sound of wind and rain outside the window grew louder, the pitter-patter of the downpour hitting the windowsill. The moisture mixed with the smell of dust swept in, covering the faint smell of blood in the air. In the suddenly urgent sound of wind and rain, the boy frowned towards the door, muttering, why haven't Mom and Dad come back yet? He straightened his head to look in the direction of the door, even unconsciously taking 2 steps forward. Not far from his feet, the bodies of his parents lay quietly, their wide-open eyes staring at him. His mother's arm, which had completely stiffened, was stretched out in front, almost half a centimeter away from the boy's toes. And he was still waiting for them in confusion. This black humor-like drama made even Kay, who had directed all this, couldn't help but find it interesting. The boy's foot finally lifted again. Kay opened his eyes wide, almost expectantly watching all this. This was different from every accident he had experienced before, but it seemed to teach him another more interesting art of tragedy beyond simple and brutal killing. Learned. Ah, the boy's cry of surprise sounded, as if he had been tripped by something on the ground, and discovered that surprise. Sure enough. Just as he muttered these 2 words in his heart, Kay's vision suddenly blurred, and he uncontrollably fell backward, collapsing directly onto the sofa, a sense of weakness sweeping over his body. Not good. Been tricked. This thought just flashed by, he didn't even have the strength to do anything else, his consciousness began to sink. In the dim moment of his vision, he saw the familiar small figure come to him in a nimble posture that did not match a blind person, and even skillfully took the black umbrella from the side of the sofa. The raindrops falling from the umbrella hit his face. The icy temperature made Kay barely awake for a moment. He bit his tongue hard, letting the pain temporarily dominate his nerves. With a strong will, he was about to jump up. But the next moment, he froze completely. The familiar tip of the umbrella was against his forehead. Hey, don't be impulsive, little guy. Kay slowly raised his hands, looked up at the boy in front of him, and tried to pull out a smile. People like me should be dealt with by the police. Don't let hatred cloud your mind. He met a pair of very calm eyes. They didn't seem impulsive at all. A child so small, who could pretend to be blind the first time he found out his parents were killed, could chat and laugh with the murderer in this house full of bodies as if nothing had happened, and decisively took action when he was paralyzed. Wait. An involuntary chill spread through his heart. Kay murmured subconsciously, that cup of milk. Strong sleeping pills, didn't I say? I drink a cup every night before going to bed to fall asleep. The boy tilted his head and showed a smile. Kay suddenly realized, he didn't expect to fall into the hands of such an apparently harmless child. All right, the Q&A is over. The cold muzzle on his forehead moved, and the other party didn't even ask his real name from beginning to end. Dr. Filt, you should be on your way. Kay snapped back to reality. No, wait. Once you kill me, this dream will end. The boy interrupted him with a smile. What? After all, it's not the first time being killed. First time unfamiliar, second time it gets familiar. This is the 3rd time, you should be used to it, doctor. In Kay's astonished and confused eyes, the boy's tone suddenly became casual. He playfully bit the last 2 words, showing a bit of impatience. So, see you next time, Dr. Filt. Bang. The moist air seeping in from the outside window mixed with the bloody smell in the room, exploding with a gunshot. To complete a perfect dubbing for this silent bullet, the boy nonchalantly moved his left hand away from his lips, and his right hand retracted the umbrella to shake a beautiful gun flower in the air. Then, he raised his index finger, gently blew, and announced. Game over. Following his line of sight forward, the bullet that entered from Kay's forehead and flew out of the back of his head, flew towards the rain curtain outside the window at an unabated speed, splashing countless droplets. For a moment, the world seemed to be frozen. Just like the slow motion in movies began to play frame by frame, the whole world, like the glass window pierced by the bullet, large cracks began to spread along the splashing droplets. Then, it turned into countless splashing fragments. This world shattered with a bang. We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 3. The moment the world shattered, countless lights spread out from the cracks. It seemed as if he was surrounded by a pitch-black sea, where large fragments of stars were scattered, densely covering the distant horizon. The seawater chased him, coming from all directions. Under a pressure that felt like drowning, Bai Yi struggled to surface, the light shining on his eyelids. He slowly opened his eyes, waking up. The glaring light shone on his face through the gap in the curtains, and beneath him was the soft touch unique to a bed. The wall clock on the opposite wall made a ding sound, its 2 hands forming a straight line. It was exactly 6 in the morning. Bai Yi lay on the bed, his gaze unfocused, continuing to space out. Like a machine that had suddenly lost its connection and was stuck, he could fall back asleep at any moment. It wasn't until 5 minutes later that his blurry eyes finally focused, and his whole body, as if fully charged, suddenly sat up straight, coming to life. The next second, he stretched out his arms and let out a long yawn, his messy hair trembling with his movement, and those eyes that had just focused half closed again. He looked like he was running low on battery and was about to go back to sleep. The same dream has been going on for 7 days now. A thought flashed through his mind, and he let out a drawn-out sigh. So boring. Dreaming was an experience that everyone had, but to enter different dreamscapes every night, to remain absolutely conscious, and to remember every detail clearly after waking up, such a special experience was not something everyone got to have. For Bai Yi, however, this had been his daily life. Ever since he could remember, it had always been like this. Every night after falling asleep, he would uncontrollably plunge into various dreams, facing all sorts of strange beginnings. Most of the time, he dreamed of a deep sea, where the water was as thick as ink, and around him were constantly falling fragments of stars. The pressure, so real it was suffocating, always gave him the illusion of drowning, until he struggled to wake up from the nightmare with all his might. At other times, he would dream of various scenes, playing a certain role in them. Sometimes he was just delivering a letter for someone, sometimes he might be in mortal danger, needing to make the right choice in a very short time. The duration of these dreams varied. The longest one repeated the same dream for half a month, the shortest one changed every day. After many years of trial and summary, Bai Yi was not without gains. He found that as long as he immersed himself in the role, according to his own speculation, tried to do things that were in line with the role's wishes, the same dream often wouldn't last a few days before it completely disappeared from his side. But if he seriously violated the role's wishes, then he would continue to repeat this dream day and night. The longest time, a dream repeated for 3 months. It was simply like being possessed by an evil spirit. The dream last night was the 7th repetition. The moment he entered the dream, what appeared in front of Bai Yi was a glaring crime scene. As far as the eye could see, there were 2 fresh corpses and a freshly baked murderer. And he, like a ghost hovering in the sky, silently overlooked all this. Then, he watched as the little boy who walked down the stairs was frightened by the scene in front of him, directly fell on the stairs, and made a piercing noise. And the murderer was quickly alarmed by the noise made by the little boy, turned around to look at him for the first time, and was about to add another fresh corpse to the ground. All this was too much to take in, like a cutscene in a game playing out in front of Bai Yi's eyes, until his vision blurred and he found himself already in the body of the little boy, becoming the role that was about to be a cannon fodder. Facing a pair of eyes full of murderous intent, Bai Yi didn't hesitate, immediately unfocused his gaze, stumbled and touched the wall to get up, his face showing the bewildered and innocent look unique to children. Is it Dr. Filt? The other party, as he expected, was stunned for a second, and then responded, temporarily stopping the action in his hands. All the lies were so fluent, Bai Yi's fast-running brain allowed him to make the most advantageous choice in an instant to play a blind child, and actively give this murderer who might kill him at any time a reasonable identity, reducing the other party's vigilance. Even in his speech, he deliberately guided the other party's interest in talking. The parents who died tragically, the child who knew nothing and saw the enemy as a friend, the closed environment that had not been visited by guests for a long time and was likely to be undisturbed in the future. He actively offered the murderer in front of him enough material for a wonderful script, and a stage without anyone's interference. The fact proved that such a small trick was indeed effective. Perhaps some people had a bad factor in their nature that liked to tear up others' beauty, appreciate others' tragedy, and get pleasure from it, even if this time to watch the drama was likely to increase the risk for himself. Perhaps, this was also one of the important reasons why so many villains died of talking too much. And a young, weak and blind child, what threat did he pose? Even if killed a little later, it's not a big deal. In this way, Kay was gradually led on, relaxing his vigilance towards Bai Yi. With a certain perverse mentality, he dealt with the bodies while conversing with the boy in front of him as Dr. Filt, even feeling a bit regretful about having to kill such an obedient and sensible prey. This process was enough for Bai Yi to roughly figure out his character, while also using the corner of his eye to subtly familiarize himself with the surroundings. For example, where there were handy tools, where there were suitable escape routes, where there were key props that could help a child overcome an adult. The strong sleeping pills stored under the reception desk were his unexpected joy. Although the dream world was different from reality, and the types and packaging of the drugs were also different, just by opening the bottle and taking a sniff, Bai Yi was able to determine from his long-standing experience that this was a drug with a strong sedative effect. Although finding such strange drugs at the hotel's reception desk was a bit off, it was hard not to suspect that this was a black shop. Then, Bai Yi tasted it himself. 3 minutes later, he started to feel dizzy. 5 seconds later, this weak body fell directly to the ground. This sudden, drop dead, even scared Kay, who thought that a colleague had unknowingly infiltrated the hotel, and he immediately gripped his weapon, doubting and suspecting until the last second of the dream shattering. But Bai Yi successfully used the first opportunity to enter the dream to find a key prop that could break the situation, and estimated the effect and approximate onset time himself. By converting between the physique of a child and an adult, he roughly knew how long the same dose would take to work on another person. The next night, when he opened his eyes again on the familiar steps, Bai Yi already had a complete plan in his mind. This time, with early preparation, he deceived K's eyes with more perfect acting skills. Then, he focused all his attention on observing this Dr. Filt, without diverting too much attention to observe the surroundings. And he made his first tentative counter kill. This rash attempt failed as expected. Then came the second time, the third time. Failure after failure, each time closer to success. The power gap between a child and an adult was not easily bridged, especially when he had not fully grasped the other party's mind, and every step was perfectly responsive. As long as a slight flaw was exposed to arouse the other party's suspicion, there was absolutely no room for resistance. But his goal had been achieved. With the information collected from the dreams time and time again, the murderer's personality model established in Bai Yi's mind became more and more perfect, and the previous failures of counter-killing also provided him with more ample experience. Until the 5th time he entered the dream. This time, everything was under Bai Yi's control. How to make people relax their vigilance, how to make the other party's every step follow your guidance. When you understand this person's character enough, it's not a difficult thing. From the moment he woke up from the dream, every word Bai Yi said, every step he took, his expression and tone, and even the position he stood in, were all considered. The moment he opened his mouth, he knew what the other party would say next, just as this time in the dream when he handed out that glass of milk, he was sure that the other party would definitely not refuse. This was when his vigilance was at its lowest. After a successful experience, on the 6th day, the 7th day, when Bai Yi woke up in the same dream again, facing the same opening, it was simply like holding a clearance guide to brush a copy, without any difficulty. In order not to be so boring, to add a little difficulty to himself, he didn't even completely copy the guide from the last time. Even so, when you know enough about a person, and the other person knows nothing about you, it's not difficult to design a trap for them to step into. Just as a prey that has been killed once by a trap, it's not difficult to kill a second or third time. In this way, Bai Yi completed a triple kill. It was not an escape, but a counter kill. He could feel the deep pleasure from the bottom of his heart of the role he was playing, each time deeper than the last. But Bai Yi went from being initially enthusiastic to now being bored. It was like repeatedly solving a puzzle with a known answer, or eating the same snack over and over again. Even if he changed the way he ate, he couldn't help but get tired of it. Hey, this level should be satisfying enough. Standing in front of the mirror in the bathroom, he gently splashed cold water on his face. Bai Yi looked up at the mirror on the wall. The boy in the mirror was thin and tall, wearing a large white short-sleeved shirt. His black hair was messy. A few strands of hair on his forehead were wet by the splashed water droplets, revealing his dark eyes, and there were faint and unnoticeable dark circles around them. Bai Yi yawned, and the deep black eyes in the mirror suddenly became misty. He murmured, as if speaking to the regret in the dream that may or may not exist, or the reason that made him fall into the dream behind all these nightmares, he said. At least bring some fresher dreams. He didn't expect a response, however. The splashed water hit the mirror, flowing around, making the person in the mirror extremely blurry due to the water flow. The next second, the water flowing around suddenly became orderly, forming one blurry and distorted text after another on the mirror, like an old TV screen flickering with static, presenting a poor signal reception. Bai Yi suddenly widened his eyes. What is this? System energy is full, nightmare game officially online. As the first line of text disappeared, another line of text emerged. Detected the only beta player, already bound. We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 4. Something interesting happened. Staring at the scene before him that clearly exceeded common sense, Bai Yi was silent for a few seconds. He reached out to push the non-existent glasses on the bridge of his nose, revealing a detective-like determined expression. He slowly said in a tone of, there is only one truth. Could it be, this is the legendary system cheat? And am I the chosen one? The surroundings were still silent. On the blurry mirror, the distorted text flickered dimly and brightly. Bai Yi seemed to have received an answer, nodded seriously, and completed his self-questioning and self-answering. It must be so. Saying this, he stretched out his finger and seriously poked the mirror that obviously was not right and did not reflect any figures. So, where is the newbie gift pack? Where is the newbie gift pack? He poked the mirror several times, and the text on it became more and more distorted and flickered, but there was not even a cheap special effect, as if nothing had happened. Bai Yi's originally excited eyes suddenly became extremely disappointed, full of doubt and disdain. He said expressionlessly, no way, in this day and age, there can't be a system that doesn't even have the standard newbie gift pack, right? With each sentence, he poked once. System. In the silence, one by one, the text emerged on the mirror, flickering more and more intensely. The system energy is full, the Nightmare game is officially online. From the official launch of the game, players can enter different Nightmare Fragment instances after falling asleep. Whenever a player successfully clears a Nightmare Fragment instance, they will receive game rewards corresponding to the difficulty and content of the instance. Detection of existing Nightmare Fragments that have not completely dissipated, included in the player's game database, beginning settlement. This time, the text on the mirror changed extremely quickly, giving Bai Yi no time to react or even complain. Cleared Nightmare Fragment, blood colored in. Instance level. Clearance evaluation, A. Points earned, 10. Beginning special reward extraction. The transparent text turned into a stream of water and dissipated in front of Bai Yi's eyes, and everything around suddenly became illusory. The mirror seemed to be constantly extending up and down, blurring the boundaries of space. At some moment, Bai Yi felt as if he had returned to the bottomless deep sea. Star fragments fell all around, and countless glows enveloped him. As the starlight dissipated, several crystals slowly condensed. The dreamy and confusing color flashed in front of Bai Yi's eyes and disappeared in an instant. You have obtained a special drop, Nightmare Crystal, white times 3. The game backpack has been opened and automatically stored. You have obtained a 1-star character card, Ghost of the Rainy Night, upgradable. A phantom card flew out from midair, gently spun in front of Bai Yi, and then slowly dissipated. On the card, a tall and thin man in a trench coat was walking in the rainy night, a black umbrella covering most of his face. Only the corner of his mouth showed a smile that was not quite a smile. Under the umbrella, the pitch black shadow merged with the background of the card. He bowed to Bai Yi, and the whole person slowly exited with the dissipation of the phantom card. Based on your performance in the instance, you have obtained a growable skill card, Praise of the Blind. Another phantom card condensed in midair. This time, what appeared on the card was a frail-looking little boy. He was squatting on high steps, his body shrouded in the shadow of the corridor. Under his long and curled eyelashes, his pupils were hollow and deep. There was a faint reflection of blood in his eyes. He smiled slightly at Bai Yi and also dissipated. In the end, there was only one line of text left on the mirror. Settlement completed. Displaying player attribute panel. Name, Bai Yi. Age, 17. Talent, Rhythm of All Things LV10, Awakening 10%. Note, a talent that awakened on its own due to a naturally powerful soul, capable of passively sensing the life rhythm and spiritual fluctuations of all things, seems to have brought you a lot of trouble. Under the dual suppression of the Nightmare game system and the lawless world rules, this talent cannot awaken further at present. Bai Yi's gaze couldn't help but linger for a second. He continued to look down without changing his expression. Life skills, not displayed below LV1. Bewitch LV3. Note, your natural talent combined with years of rich practice has created your transcendent accomplishments. As long as you are willing, you can deceive anyone in this world, including yourself. All pyramid scheme leaders pale in comparison to you, willingly admit defeat, and can only be laid off and reemployed. This ordinary skill has reached the limit of mortals, and after integrating with the related spiritual transcendent abilities, there is a chance to further break through to a transcendent skill. Bai Yi had a question mark above his head. Quote ellipsis question mark quote. This, I'm not, I don't have, don't talk nonsense. First was a subconscious denial. Bai Yi's tone gradually became righteous. This system, how did it learn to make up stories? Could it be because I used the task reward to offset the newbie gift pack, and it's worried about being exposed by my cleverness, so it's feeling guilty? The response to him was still silence. It made him look abnormal talking to the mirror. But Bai Yi didn't have any sense of embarrassment at all. As expected, it's feeling guilty. I told you I'm not that kind of person. More text flickered quickly on the mirror, as if it couldn't bear it any longer. It interrupted someone's words in this way. Dark cuisine LV2. Note, in a certain sense, being able to elevate cooking to this level and achieve the effect that only poison can do with ordinary ingredients is also a kind of transcendent talent. Iron stomach LV2. Note, enjoying your own dark cuisine every day and still being able to live until now, it's obvious how strong your stomach is. This may be an even more transcendent talent. Personality mask LV1. Note, special experiences allow you to switch between multiple character personalities skillfully, as simple as putting different personality masks on your face. When the fake becomes real, the real is also fake. When an intermittent schizophrenic perfectly plays the role of a schizophrenic, should he be recognized for his superb acting skills, or should his condition be diagnosed as worsening? Click to view more skills. Bai Yi had a second question mark. Is this note serious? The legendary way of countering sarcasm with sarcasm, using the way of the Onmyoji to cure the great Onmyoji's body? TL, from Yiqi Ren Ji Dao, Hai Jiqi Ren Ji Shen, using other people's own principles and methods to cultivate themselves. I suspect you're implying something about me, but I have no evidence. JPG. The text on the mirror continued. Transcendent skills. Praise of the Blind LV1. Passively increase the goodwill of neutral units by 5 points, friendly units by 10 points, and reduce the defense and hostility of enemy units. Only effective for the same unit for the first time, cannot be repeated. Aura type skill, no need for the player to cast. Actively cast on people within 10 meters, can produce an effect similar to hashtag lowering one's own presence hash, making other people subconsciously ignore the player's existence. But once the player makes a noticeable move, this effect is automatically broken. The casting effect and range are related to the player's mental power. Actively cast on oneself, temporarily reducing one's own vision as a price, briefly amplifying one's own strength. The degree of strength amplification is directly proportional to the degree of vision reduction. In a completely blind state, the strength will be amplified by 300%. Lasts for up to 3 minutes. After 3 minutes everything returns to normal. Special, Adam's Soul Praise. Can only be used once, a unique consumable. After using this skill, it will summon a soul phantom that obeys your commands 100%, and will go through fire and water for you until it completely dissipates. Note, this is a praise for the blind. You played with enemies far stronger than yourself in the identity of the blind, completed the identity switch between the hunter and the prey, ignited the nightmare with the flame of revenge, and obtained the special lament of the soul praise. People often trust too much in what they see with their own eyes, but who is the real blind one? This time, Bai Yi was full of question marks. Being able to blind enemies, making people relax their guard, ignore oneself, and also being able to blind oneself, enhancing strength. Either you're blind or I'm blind. This skill, it really lives up to its name. He muttered a complaint without words. His gaze fell on the last special soul praise, as if he was thinking. Just as Bai Yi's gaze was drifting, not knowing what he was thinking, the text that was originally flickering quickly gradually slowed down, revealing the last few lines, completely solidifying on the mirror. Points, 10. Card slot, Ghost of the Rainy Night. Characteristic to be confirmed, can be equipped, consumes Nightmare Crystal, white, times 1 every 24 hours, click to no longer display. Backpack, Nightmare Crystal, white, times 3. After reading this long panel information, especially those large paragraphs of text written as notes but read as sarcasm, Bai Yi was silent for a full 5 seconds. With a face devoid of expression and a pair of dead fish eyes with dark circles, he suddenly spoke. Speaking of which, don't you want to explain what you said before about energy is full? He unexpectedly did not ask more about the situation of the nightmare game, nor did he mention the extraordinary skills and cards he had just obtained, but instead targeted the first sentence the system said when it appeared. What is the so-called energy? Where does it come from? How is it full? Element detection.jpg. Word by word until the end, Bai Yi's smile gradually distorted, and his body almost showed substantial black hair. I'm afraid I've been working hard in the nightmare for you all these years. System. Bai Yi let out a sigh of regret. Sigh, the dignified system, after swallowing the hard work of this poor worker for so many years, surely you wouldn't even give a single explanation and a little bit of compensation? Although this system never gave any response, making him look like he was always talking to himself as if he was sick, but just through the frequency of text changes, it was enough for him to realize that this system was definitely not a rigid standalone system. Even if it didn't have human-like consciousness, there was a certain logical pattern. So, of course, take the opportunity to shear the wool, even if this wool is likely to come from his own body. In the silence of the room, Bai Yi, who did not get a response, continued to issue weak, helpless and pitiful complaints. The world of capitalists is so cruel. I, who have been working for so many years, really should not get deeper and deeper. Just slack off every day. Anyway, there is everything in the dream. The previous expression of fatigue as if he hadn't woken up appeared on his face again. He was indifferent to the player panel and the skill card he had just obtained, which looked very attractive, and he yawned lazily again, his eyes half closed with dark circles. Bai Yi turned around and left. Player detected to have one more reward to claim. We are currently recruiting. CNKR JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 5. Player detected to have one more reward to claim. Bai Yi had just turned around and taken a few steps. Suddenly, the water vapor in the air, which was hard to detect, was condensed by an invisible force, revealing vague and distorted text floating quietly in front of him. It was as if someone had written on a window fogged up with rain, stroke by stroke. Oh ho? Bai Yi glanced at it with interest, but his steps didn't stop, and he looked like he was about to walk right into it. Or rather, he wanted to try walking into it. That's the kind of person he was. He could do things that others found inexplicable or childish. Even if onlookers cringed, he could do it as if it was nothing. However, no matter how many steps he took, the floating text always maintained a perfect distance from him. This made Bai Yi show undisguised disappointment on his face. The reward mentioned by the system soon appeared. As the only beta player who has made outstanding contributions to the official launch of the Nightmare game system over the years, the player has received a special achievement item, a fragment of the principle of all things X1. It can be used to unconditionally upgrade any talent, skill, card, item, can be converted into corresponding nightmare crystals, can exempt a nightmare fragment instance, directly passing it. Given the rarity and specialness of this item, it is recommended that players understand the game deeply before making a careful choice. Bai Yi stopped in his tracks, staring intently at those words, a fragment of the principle of all things. The system's hand was unexpectedly generous this time. Just looking at this description, the so-called the principle of all things fragment was like an omnipotent item in the game. Let's not talk about converting nightmare crystals for now. Bai Yi didn't understand nightmare crystals at the moment, but just by its ability to exempt a nightmare fragment instance, it was quite extraordinary. Like the dream he had before, if it were now, Bai Yi could directly skip the cycle and start a new dream with the principle of all things fragment in his hand. And the ability to unconditionally upgrade any talent, skill, card, or item was even more precious. At this stage, these things were still at a low level, and upgrading might not be difficult. It wouldn't be worth it to use the principle of all things fragment. But if he saved it for later, when there were high-level skills or cards, or even directly max-level items, if he could still upgrade one level, it would be like a bug. In this way, this was a strategic item. A little thought would tell that now was not the time for the principle of all things fragment to exert its maximum value. The correct thing to do was to keep it for now and use it someday in the future. Thus, as expected, he should use it now. Bai Yi finished speaking, but found that there was no response on the mirror surface. The flickering font seemed to be frozen there. He expressed surprise. No way? Did it crash on the first day of launch, or did you not want to fulfill the reward from the beginning? The frozen font finally started to flicker one by one. Player confirms to use the principle of all things fragment. Confirmed. Upgrade the talent, rhythm of all things. Bai Yi spoke lightly. 1 principle of all things, 1 rhythm of all things. It sounds so matching. System. Is it you who are wrong, or am I wrong, or is it this world that's a bit off? The current mystery level of this world is 0. The talent, rhythm of all things is suppressed. Moreover, this talent has special awakening conditions. A principle of all things fragment cannot upgrade it. So, you can't do it. The mirror was silent for a moment, then words popped out one by one. It is recommended that the player do not try to upgrade rhythm of all things at present. The player's long-standing troubles are caused by the awakening of this talent. If it goes further, it will only deepen the troubles, which contradicts the player's long-standing goal of trying to get rid of the troubles. So, you really can't do it. This text hadn't finished displaying yet, and Bai Yi simply and rudely interrupted it, not giving it any face. He concluded, you're so useless. System. Really too useless, simply the most useless system I've ever seen. After all, he hadn't seen a second system yet. There's nothing wrong with saying that. System. I really can't imagine that the system industry has been so internalized to this point. Such a useless system can actually take up a post. The competitive pressure is so small, it's really enviable. System. The player can live safely to this age. It must be because the people in this world are very kind, right? Seeing that the text in front of him hadn't changed for a long time, Bai Yi finally stopped outputting 2 opposing techniques and reluctantly opened his mouth. You can't do this, you can't do that, then I'll just ask a question. You should be able to answer it, right? One word after another appeared impatiently. In view of the contribution made by the only beta player for the Nightmare game, the player can ask a question that does not exceed the current authority. If it exceeds the authority, this extra reward will be invalidated. The player will not have a second chance to ask questions. Forget it, I won't make it difficult for you. The young man sighed. My question is very simple. He stared at the mirror surface abruptly, and spoke word by word. I want to know, what is the essence of the talent, rhythm of all things, and how to solve the little trouble it brings. As he spoke, he took a few steps forward, swiftly pulling open the thick gray curtains. Along with the sunlight that poured into the room, there was a sudden, extremely loud collision sound. Countless streams of information rushed towards him. Or rather, from the moment he woke up, the hustle and bustle around him had never ceased. But at this moment, those voices that he had long been accustomed to suddenly became incredibly harsh. They lifted his skull and screamed loudly, desperately drilling into his mind. Bai Yi looked down through the window. This was a very remote street, located in an old city area that had long been abandoned. Most of the area was uninhabited, and the shops across the entire street were almost all closed. Only a few old people without children still lived here and hadn't moved away. It was rare for such a big commotion to occur. He accurately cast his gaze in the direction where the information flow was most intense, and found that quite a few people had unusually gathered at the corner of this usually quiet street. In the center of the crowd, amidst a sea of blood, were the collapsed old walls and overturned big truck. Some people were crying, some were shouting. Sadness, despair, resentment, regret. A large amount of mixed emotions were surging. Bai Yi felt as if his skull was about to be pried open, and then a pile of chaotic information was as if it had been kneaded into a rag by someone, carrying the not yet dried dirty water stains, and stuffed into his head all at once. He withdrew his gaze from the window, calmly walked away from the window, and the whole person fell back onto the bed. Bai Yi, who was spread out in a big character shape on the bed, yawned silently again, his eyelids almost sticking together, looking extremely sleepy, as if he would fall asleep the next second. He seemed to finally remember that there was a system that had been ignored, barely opened his eyelids, and asked lazily, such a simple question, you should be able to answer it, right? In his line of sight, one word after another appeared. Rhythm of all things. The player's naturally strong soul allows them to uncontrollably sense the life rhythm of all things, including mental fluctuations, but because they live in a world without magic, they can't find any way to turn passive into active control. Ordinary people living in this world have not stepped into the transcendent stage, they are just mortals, unable to control themselves, unconsciously dissipating their own life rhythm, especially when their emotions fluctuate intensely. Therefore, players living in crowds will always be passively aware of too many chaotic emotional impacts at all times. Make it simpler, speak in a simpler way. The player's soul is naturally strong, other ordinary people's souls are naturally weak. The player cannot control themselves and passively receives all life rhythms, other ordinary people cannot control themselves and constantly dissipate life rhythms. Just like a signal tower that cannot be turned off and can only passively receive signals within a certain distance, and countless signal sources that unconsciously emit fluctuations. There are 3 solutions. First, turn off the signal reception function of the signal tower. What the player has been trying to do is this one, actively lowering their own mental activity, making themselves in a state of low spirits most of the time, to reduce the passive perception of the life rhythm of the outside world. Because the player themselves is just a mortal, they don't understand any psychic transcendent skills, this method has limited effects. It can only temporarily shield life rhythms that are not high in intensity. Unless the player themselves achieve a certain sublimation, life breaks through to a higher level, the talent fully awakens, and control is freely exercised. Second, let the signal source control its own signal fluctuations. Because ordinary people in the non-magical world have not even stepped into the threshold of transcendence, it is even more impossible to learn to restrain their own thoughts. Close black lens bracket. Unless everyone completes the sublimation of the essence of life, becoming a transcendent who can control their own life rhythm and no longer dissipate. Third, completely clear the nightmare game. The player will have the ability to realize all their wishes. Become an omnipotent god. Omnipotent, huh? Bai Yi quietly looked at the text presented in front of him. The noisy voices in his mind were boiling. The transparent font condensed by water vapor twisted in midair, and the faint water vapor spread around along the blurry edges, like the whispers of an evil god, bewitching people's hearts. He thought for a second, not knowing whether to say that his brain circuit was quirky or that he loved to court death with great courage. So, it's no problem to dismantle you then? If that is your wish. The words in midair emitted a strange aura, and a line of blurry font recondensed. What you think will inevitably become reality. We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 6. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the lights on Maple Leaf Street were bright. This was the busiest bar street in the new district of Zhongyuan. Damn it, a bunch of dogs, a man reeking of alcohol was propped out of the bar door, thrown on the ground like trash. Someone kicked him in the butt, but it wasn't clear who. Laughter echoed around without any attempt to hide it. He fell, dizzy, cursing and covering his forehead that had been hit by a bottle. Blood flowed through his fingers, smearing his face and hands, mixing with the smell of alcohol into a pungent odor. Hiss, the pain from the wound on his forehead made the man grimace. Just wait for me. There are many of you this time, I won't stoop to your level. He cursed while glaring back at the bar, spat forcefully, and finally left the bar reluctantly. Compared to the brightly lit and noisy bar, the dark and quiet alley at the back door was like a different world. There was not a single figure on the road. A garbage can that had not been cleaned for a long time was knocked over by someone, and the garbage that spilled out emitted a foul smell. The long neglected street light was leaning on the side of the road, its shadow under the moonlight looked like a ghost. At 2 o'clock in the deep night, it was as quiet as a graveyard. For some reason, Han Shan felt a little creeped. Damn, he cursed softly, but he didn't choose to turn back and take another road. As a person who had been hanging around bars and casinos for many years, he believed he had the courage to walk alone at night. But such an association was a bit ominous for him. He shook his dizzy head and continued to walk forward unsteadily. But he hadn't walked far. Patta. A drop of water fell on his head, followed by the second, the third, in a blink of an eye, countless droplets were falling down with a pitter-patter. Damn it. Han Shan cursed again, feeling unlucky. It's actually raining. The wound on his forehead was washed by the rain, causing another wave of intense pain. In the end, he could only grit his teeth, take off his coat to cover his head, and start running. He was in a very sorry state. If he remembered correctly, there was probably about 500 meters to the end of this alley. Not far from the alley entrance was a cheap small hotel that had been open for many years. He could take shelter from the rain there, or simply spend the night. The increasing rain was smearing the whole world like ink, and the blood flowing down his forehead made his vision increasingly blurry and dizzy. Han Shan felt his body heating up, and his steps were getting heavier and heavier. It was as if he was carrying a growing mountain on his back. Just when he thought he was going to collapse in this alley, suddenly, a beam of pale yellow warm light came from the front, casting a faint glow on his face. He looked up. In his blurry vision, a somewhat old inn appeared in the night. The door of the inn was not tightly closed, and the light was shining out from the crack of the door. Through the curtain of rain, he vaguely saw a figure in the door crack. Han Shan immediately perked up, his whole body suddenly energized. He ran over in 2 or 3 strides and pushed open the half-closed door. Is the boss here? I want to stay, stay. His voice suddenly choked, as if a walnut was suddenly stuck in his throat. His impatient steps also stopped, and he just stood stiffly at the door, his hand on the door shaking violently. The dim yellow light illuminated the blood all over the floor. 2 cold bodies lay not far from him, one in front of the other. A man was squatting on the ground with his back to him, one hand touching the body on the ground, seemingly doing something strange. Disturbed by the noise of his pushing the door, the man turned around. Han Shan's body started to shake violently. The scene before his eyes scared him. This sudden shock was like a huge hammer hitting him. His head, which was already dizzy from the injury and the fever from the rain, buzzed, and he swayed and fell to the ground, his hands smeared with blood. But he was dizzy and weak, and didn't have the strength to get up. Ah, the first time I do this kind of thing, and I was caught. A deep and slow male voice sounded above his head, accompanied by the sound of approaching footsteps, then the sound of an umbrella tip hitting the ground. The man had already come to his front. From bottom to top, what appeared in his vision were the man's long legs, a black trench coat hanging straight to his knees, half-long pale golden hair that was slightly curled at the collar, and a face that at first glance made people think of musicians, painters, and other identities rich in artistic atmosphere. Coming uninvited in the middle of the night, what a rude guest. The man's deep green eyes looked at him, the curve of his smile was as standard as if measured with a ruler, and his tone was very elegant, which made Han Shan feel a chill. He calmly raised the black umbrella in his hand, a light red droplet fell along the umbrella surface, just falling on Han Shan's trembling eyelashes. Accompanied by the slight rotation of the umbrella, dark muzzle appeared at the tip of the umbrella. Then, it was pressed against Han Shan's forehead. Should I say you're lucky, or unlucky? Ha, ha, you. Han Shan wanted to beg for mercy, wanted to get up and run away, but his chaotic brain didn't obey. The unprecedented fear slowed his thinking by a few beats. He didn't even know what he was saying, only making a few vague sounds from his throat. He didn't know anything, he only knew he didn't want to die. Han Shan's sorry, funny, and pitiful appearance seemed to amuse the man. He couldn't help but look him up and down, his gaze especially falling on his wrinkled clothes reeking of alcohol and the wound on his forehead, becoming clear. The man casually poked at the wound on his forehead with the tip of his umbrella, sighing like a poet. The mediocrity of this world always seems to be like this, squandering life when they have it, and only when they are about to lose it do they so desperately crave to cherish it. Spare me. Han Shan, who was too scared to speak, finally managed to stutter out a complete sentence. Please. The man paused, took a serious look at him, and seemed thoughtful. After all, you are the first living person I've met here since I arrived. To simply and brutally kill you doesn't seem to fit with my aesthetic. He thought for 3 seconds and had an idea. An unexpected twist of fate brought you here tonight, so why not let fate decide your life and death? With a crisp sound, the man's hand somehow pulled a coin from his left pocket and flicked it into the air. Heads is life, tails is death. The coin was tumbling in midair, quickly falling down. A hand steadily caught it. Han Shan tried hard to straighten his neck and widen his eyes to see, but due to the height difference, he could only see the back of the man's hand. His whole heart was hanging, pounding wildly. The man looked down and clenched the hand on the umbrella handle. I'm really sorry. His attitude clearly indicated the result. No, Han Shan's face turned white in an instant, feeling the gun muzzle against his forehead. He was about to faint from fear. Bang. But the next second, the force on his forehead disappeared. He didn't die? Han Shan looked up in astonishment. The man who had just simulated a gunshot with his mouth casually hooked up the corner of his mouth, revealing a standard smile. Just a small joke, lucky guessed. Fate has finally favored you this time. So, excuse me for not seeing you off. The man's trailing voice was drowned out by the increasingly loud wind and rain, and Han Shan was completely overwhelmed by the ecstasy of escaping from death. The moment he was let go, he jumped up from the ground at a speed he had never had before. This body, which had been weak and dizzy, seemed to suddenly surge with infinite strength, supporting him to suddenly jump out of the inn's door and run out without looking back. In the storm, he ran like a rabbit being chased by a tiger, until the sudden surge of strength gradually left his body, and the intense fatigue finally swept over him. This guy, who had been tormented tonight, finally couldn't hold on any longer and simply fainted. The dim yellow light of the inn shone faintly. Looking at the increasingly blurred figure in the heavy rain, the man sighed softly. Unsurprisingly easy to deceive. It really gives no sense of accomplishment. He spread out his palm. A coin quietly lay there. The surface was complex and gorgeous patterns. It was tails. He flicked the coin into the air again and caught it. Where was there any choice of fate? Rather, he was fate. At least, in the script he wove, he was the one who controlled the direction of the story, including the life and death of the other party. He was fate itself. Pulling his gaze back from the window, the man turned around again, the hem of his coat drawing an arc in midair. Compared to that guy who gives no sense of accomplishment, these two bodies seem more interesting. He squatted down and reached out to poke the face of the corpse. It's clearly a product formed by the crystallization of nightmares, but the touch is so realistic. I wonder if it's just superficial, or if the internal structure is the same as a real corpse. How did they do it? I really want to see. Just as he seemed to want to do something outrageous, in the upper right corner of his vision, a virtual clock that only he could see suddenly flashed. The minute hand gently jumped. The scale was infinitely close to the hour. An hour has passed so quickly? He murmured in disappointment and stood up. Never mind, for a first attempt, this level is enough. From now on, all I have to do is wait. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. In an instant, the entire inn, along with the man himself, disappeared at a rapid speed, as if being erased from a white paper by an invisible eraser, until it was completely empty. Meanwhile, an abandoned old city district, almost back to back adjacent with the bustling Zhongyuan district. On the second floor of an old building, Bai Yi opened his eyes, his gaze cast out the window. The rain curtain blocked his vision, the heavy tree shadows in the distance and the continuous eaves merged into one. He raised his palm, and a phantom card slowly condensed in his palm. On the card, a man shrouded under a black umbrella revealed a smile, his expression unpredictable. Oh my, the first performance seems to have gone well, Tilda. Bai Yi raised an eyebrow, revealing a pleased smile, the curve getting bigger and bigger. He recalled what the system had said before. Clear the nightmare game, and you can realize all wishes, become an omnipotent god. Let me see if this is just a bluff false advertising, or if there is some possibility. Thinking this, Bai Yi casually flipped the card in his fingers. On the back of the card were lines of brief character settings. A ghost that appears in the rainy night at any time. A butcher who brings slaughter and blood. A pleasure offender who is good at playing with people's hearts. K. We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 7. The hustle and bustle of the streets had faded away at some point. Those sounds of sorrow, despair, resentment, and regret gradually receded in the long wail of the ambulance. The whole world had returned to a state of murmuring whispers, all illusions had dissipated. Yet, the distorted text floating before his eyes had not disappeared. This surreal, fantastical scene existed incredibly real. If this is your wish, what do you think will inevitably become reality? Bai Yi was lazily sprawled on the bed, looking up at these two lines of text on the ceiling. It wasn't an illusion, he had really been chosen by a baffling nightmare game. You really dare to say it? He started laughing, sitting upright. Your system is really messed up. You falsely accused me before, and in the end, the pyramid scheme leader turned out to be you. Who knew if the so-called nightmare game was real or fake? What the existence that claimed to be the game system was in essence. Perhaps everything was just a scam. If one were to go by conspiracy theories, the monster in the depths of the nightmare wearing the skin of the game system, choosing someone in reality, and gradually invading this world through this seemed like a reasonable setting too. But who cares? Bai Yi only knew that his interest had been successfully piqued. Free paths, huh? Only children make choices. Mature adults naturally want it all. Summoning the familiar basic panel, Bai Yi's gaze swept over it, directly aiming at the bottom. This was a function he hadn't had the chance to understand before. Perhaps he could use it soon, so naturally, he had to figure it out first. Points, 10. Card slot, Ghost in the Rainy Night. Trait to be confirmed. Can be equipped, consumes Nightmare Crystal, white, ×1 every 24 hours. Click to no longer display. Backpack, Nightmare Crystal, white, ×3, principle of all things ×1. Points were easy to understand, they were the currency of the Nightmare game, and Nightmare Crystals seemed to be some kind of special consumable. As for that character card, could it be what he had guessed? With a thought, Bai Yi conjured a phantom card in his palm. Under the black umbrella, the man's smile was inscrutable. Following that, rows of text prompts appeared. Card, Ghost in the Rainy Night. Origin, Bloody Inn. Prototype, serial killer K who appears on rainy nights. Description, a special reward obtained by the player for defeating an enemy that they should not have been able to defeat, crossing their own character limitations. Possesses all of K's killing techniques and other skills. Apart from this, it's blank. The player can add their own background, experience, personality, and other trait settings to this card. Limited to 3, and cannot exceed the limit of a 1-star card. Note, traits that are severely incompatible with the character prototype cannot take effect. The higher the compatibility of the trait, the more likely it is to take effect. When equipping this card, the player will directly master all the skills of the card character and transform into the character itself. The closer the player's portrayal is to the trait setting, the faster the card's growth and upgrade experience will be gained. This explanation was indeed full of information. So, the name is K, that's too casual. Recalling the NPC whose surname was still unknown, Bai Yi made a comment, then ignored it and focused on the key point. So, this is like giving me a blank assassin NPC card that I can mold as I wish, with skills already maxed out, and the character setting is all up to me. As for not being able to be severely incompatible with the prototype character, that was also easy to understand. Following the system's prompts, Bai Yi's fingers danced, and he casually wrote in midair, inherently kind, unable to bear to kill, a good old man who loves cats and dogs. Hiss. Just as he expected, as soon as this line of text fell, it turned into a puff of blue smoke and disappeared cleanly. This trait is severely incompatible with the character prototype. Then let's try this. Bai Yi persevered. Unmatched skills, able to fight 100 alone, the king of assassins who can catch bullets barehanded. After this line of text appeared, it flashed in midair, although it did not turn into blue smoke and disappear. It obviously dimmed bit by bit, and a suddenly appearing long line directly crossed out the entire sentence. Exceeds the card limit, currently cannot take effect. So that's how it is. Bai Yi was not disappointed, his eyes lit up instead. The corners of his mouth curled up high, like a child who had suddenly found a new toy. His face was full of anticipation. Let's try this again. After more than 10 attempts, Bai Yi had roughly figured out what kind of trait settings were within the acceptable range of this card. And as long as the trait was judged to pass, it would automatically glow and turn into golden text, floating above. At this moment, the golden text floating in midair already had dozens of dense lines, bizarre and varied. Some of the content was purely the result of his own bad taste. Bai Yi raised his hand and randomly selected 3 from them. Confirm traits? As Bai Yi confirmed his decision, the other golden characters in midair all dissipated, leaving behind the last 3 lines that turned into 3 streams of light, rushing straight towards the card in his palm. The glowing card floated up. The man holding the black umbrella slowly turned around as the card flipped, and on the originally blank side of the card's back, several lines of pitch black characters gradually appeared. A ghost that appears at any time on rainy nights. A butcher who brings slaughter and blood. A pleasure offender who is good at playing with people's hearts. K. La 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 la, perfect. Bai Yi cheerfully raised his hand, threw the card in his hand into midair, and then pinched it firmly between his middle and index fingers. At this moment, he was like a kindergarten child who had just received a new toy, simply couldn't wait to get started. However, equipping a card consumes nightmare crystals. Apart from nightmare crystals, are there no other alternative consumables? Bai Yi couldn't help but puff out his cheeks. Hey, just now you claim to be a nightmare game that can realize all wishes. You're not going to collapse so soon, are you? Is this the legendary trick to lure players in and kill them? There were only 3 nightmare crystals, white, in Bai Yi's backpack, which could only equip cards for a total of 72 hours, which was obviously not enough. Thinking of this, Bai Yi couldn't help but start outputting 2 opposing principles techniques, and the great Onmyoji was online again. A nightmare crystal can be used multiple times, each use less than 1 hour is calculated as 1 hour. In addition, character cards can also be charged through the obtained legend degree, extending the time they stay in the world. Legend degree? Bai Yi pondered over this word, it seems quite interesting. He suddenly perked up, the fatigue that had been lingering around his eyes and brows swept away. As he no longer suppressed his mental state, the next moment, the information flow coming from all directions suddenly increased several times. The passive perception of the rhythm of all things that had been reduced in the vicinity, uncontrollably expanded its range. The originally tolerable whispers turned into loud screams and laughter, as if a calm stream was replaced by a stormy ocean. They surged from all sides, wave after wave charging towards Bai Yi's brain. They lifted his skull, burrowed into his scalp, like opening a trash can, dumping all kinds of messy things into it, regardless of whether the trash can was willing to accept it or not. At this point, Bai Yi was really quite spirited. He skillfully flopped backwards, rolled to the left on the bed, then to the right, then back to the left, and once again sprawled out. After maintaining this power off mode for a full 10 seconds, Bai Yi sat up again, once again full of energy. As if nothing had happened just now, he very naturally forgot his previous actions, took out his phone from beside the pillow. So, the next step. In the pleasant muttering, Bai Yi opened the weather forecast on his phone, his gaze falling on the familiar raindrop-shaped icon. 3 days later? 3 days later, at nightfall. With the fall of the first drop of rain. Card equipped, please select the deployment location. A virtual map unfolded in midair, encompassing the entire city of Yuanyang. Some areas on the map were dimmed in gray, indicating they were not selectable, while some areas were slightly illuminated, marked with a rain pattern. So, I can directly choose the deployment location? As long as it's a rainy night. System, you're surprisingly considerate. In a surprised murmur, the area where Zhongyuan New District was located lit up, and a finger accurately poked a point on the map after it was enlarged, a point where a certain alley was located. Well, let's choose here then. Back when he was still unable to suppress his perception range, this dump had caused him quite a bit of trouble for a long time. Please choose to directly deploy, or spend nightmare crystals to construct a virtual scene, combine character cards. When the character card is unequipped, the scene will dissipate at the same time. Setting up a scene on your own requires a large amount of nightmare crystals. Based on the player's current situation, it is recommended to choose to directly deploy the card, or construct an existing scene template. Currently selectable scenes, Bloody Inn. Rainy night. The stars and moon were dark. In the depths of the secluded alley, a dim yellow light lit up. An old inn silently appeared, as if someone was sketching it out bit by bit on a blank canvas with a pen. Inside the inn, a man in a black trench coat silently appeared on the stairs, his gaze from above sweeping over the entire inn, not missing any detail. It's so real, too real. Is this really an illusion? Bai Yi pinched his arm with a face full of novelty, then lifted a strand of light golden hair from his ear and took a light sniff. Is this what it feels like to equip a character card? At this moment, he felt as if he had been split into 2 halves, possessing 2 different perspectives. One was his original self still in the apartment, and the other was this guise of the assassin, K. He could effortlessly control both sides with one mind, not knowing whether it was the effect of the character card itself, or his own persona mask ability. The Bai Yi lying in the apartment had already taken out a bag of sunflower seeds and started cracking them, while inside the inn, K began his action. While touching here and looking there, he made his way to the front desk on the first floor, even finding a bottle of very familiar strong sleeping pills in the front desk. Then there was the blood-stained hall, and those 2 bodies lying in the pool of blood. Finally, there was the TV on the wall. If turned on, could this TV receive external signals? Would it be the news channel in the dream, or could it connect to the real TV station? Bai Yi decisively made an attempt. The TV did not turn on, but a line of text jumped out instead, flaunting its presence on the screen. The degree of illusion in this scene is too high, some functions are missing. It is recommended to increase the legend degree, or use the fragment of the principle of all things, which can make the scene fragment continuously shift from illusion to reality. Another prompt with a wealth of information. So, in the end, you just want a legend degree, right? Bai Yi disappointedly put down the remote control, and shifted his attention to other places. He was just like a child who had discovered a secret base, completely engrossed in the novelty of exploration. Until the time that was constantly passing in the upper right corner of his vision reminded him. I almost forgot about the main business. He, who had received too much foul, garbage, pollution from this area, couldn't know more about it. Every day, who knows how many drunkards would pass through this alley. The location was secluded, the experimental subject was special, and it wouldn't cause too much commotion. It was perfect for a first attempt. Then, let's see who would be the lucky customer who would automatically show up. As for now, he was more interested in the two incredibly realistic bodies. While waiting for the lucky customer, Bai Yi couldn't help but cast his curious gaze at the two bodies on the ground. He couldn't help but reach out his hand. Just then, accompanied by the increasingly loud rain outside, an incredibly strong mental fluctuation was rapidly approaching. All kinds of chaotic information dispersed at the same time. Complaints, regrets, resentment, anxiety. In the sound of the wind and rain, someone pushed open the door of the inn. Bai Yi, who was lying on the apartment sofa eating sunflower seeds, suddenly opened his half-closed eyes. Oh, the protagonist finally makes an appearance? And in the inn, a man in a black trench coat smiled and turned around, his light golden half-length hair brushing past his face. Coming uninvited in the middle of the night, what a rude guest. Coming uninvited in the middle of the night, what a rude guest. The man smiled and raised the tip of his umbrella. Bang. Ah. A scream echoed, startling the entire hospital ward. Han Shan, lying on the hospital bed, opened his eyes, still immersed in the nightmare and unable to recover, as if he had returned to that terrifying night, his whole body trembling. Sir, are you okay? An hour ago, someone found you passed out on the side of the road and brought you to our hospital. This is a hospital? In the nurse's concerned voice, Han Shan finally realized his surroundings. He looked around the ward and finally breathed a sigh of relief as if he had been pardoned. Coming back to his senses and thinking back to his previous embarrassment and fear, he suddenly felt a belated sense of embarrassment and annoyance. Damn it, isn't it just a murderer? Wait. Han Shan immediately grabbed the nurse who was about to get up. I want to call the police. We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 8. You're saying that you accidentally stumbled upon a murder scene, the murderer had already killed 2 people, and almost killed you too? Half an hour later, the police involved in the murder case rushed over, listening seriously to Han Shan's account. The location is behind the Tianhai Bar on Maple Leaf Street, in a small inn. Are you sure? Han Shan nodded firmly. Yes, that's the place. Just thinking back to last night's experience, he couldn't help but feel scared, and quickly said, that guy is definitely a bona fide murderer, a madman, a pervert. You absolutely cannot let him go, you must catch him as soon as possible. The gaze of the 2 policemen looking at him became strange. The place you mentioned, there's no inn at all. The older policeman was the first to speak. Han Shan was taken aback, his eyes widened. That's impossible. The young policeman who had been silent added, there has never been any building in that alley. If you're talking about an inn, the nearest one is 300 meters away from the entrance of the alley, and it doesn't match your description at all. Could you have remembered it wrong? No, that's absolutely impossible. I didn't remember it wrong. It was there. The memory of running and embarrassment in the rainy night once again surfaced in his mind. Han Shan recalled the agitation that arose when that beam of light shone on him. He affirmed again, I definitely didn't remember it wrong. It was there, it was in that alley. At this point, he couldn't help but shiver. Then, you might have had a hallucination. Seeing that he seemed a bit agitated, the young policeman softened his voice, adding a bit of comfort to his tone. After all, you were drunk that night, and here, he pointed to his head, you also suffered a minor injury. It's normal to have hallucinations when you're soaked in the rain and have a fever. But Han Shan was not calmed down, his tone became more urgent. I really didn't remember it wrong, and I didn't have a hallucination. You don't believe me? What I said is true. The feeling of being held at gunpoint was so real, how could it be a hallucination? I almost thought I was going to die. He slapped heavily on the edge of the bed, and in his agitation, he pulled the infusion tube, a few drops of blood oozed out from the back of his hand, and his face twisted for a moment. The 2 policemen hurriedly calmed him down, restrained him, and secretly exchanged a glance with each other. 5 minutes later. Urine test? Han Shan, who failed to convince the police to believe his words and was suspected for his abnormal mental state, was dumbfounded. He realized afterwards, you suspect me of using drugs? Given that Mr. Han, you insist that you are not lying, did not have a hallucination, and must report to the police, but the oral evidence you provided does not match the facts at all. Plus, you just went to a bar yesterday. We have reason to suspect that you may have inadvertently taken some hallucinogenic drugs. Han Shan subconsciously wanted to curse, but after looking at the 2 policemen, he swallowed the words that had reached his throat. He tried his best to control his inner restlessness and anxiety, and nodded heavily. I agree to the urine test. I will prove that I did not lie. If the test shows that I did not use drugs, will you believe what I said? Every citizen who reports a case, we will take it seriously and conduct a strict investigation. With the special approval of the public security organs, the results of the urine test came out quickly. The answer was negative. Although Han Shan ruled out the possibility of taking hallucinogenic drugs, the murder case he described still made people unbelievable. There was no crime scene, no suspect, and no body. Everything seemed like a story imagined by a drunkard after getting drunk. How to file an investigation? At Han Shan's almost persistent request, the police took him to the crime scene he mentioned. The overturned trash can, the dilapidated street lamp leaning on the side of the road due to years of disrepair, the old wall where the wall paint had peeled off revealing the red bricks, from the head of the alley to the end, there was nothing but these things exuding an old atmosphere. This secluded and quiet alley was like an old man who had already stepped into his twilight years, exposing every age spot on his body under the strong sunlight of the morning sun. The young policeman who accompanied Han Shan did not speak all the way, just accompanied him from this end to that end. Watching his obviously shocked, disappointed, and incredulous expression on his face, he sighed, you should have no doubts now, right? Han Shan stood in a daze, his eyes fixed on a slightly collapsed wall in front of him, showing a doubtful expression. It should be here. Despite the fact that he was injured, rained on, drunk last night, and his head groggy, but this special experience made his memory too deep, especially when he escaped from the inn, he clearly saw this obviously collapsed wall. He couldn't help but walk up, reaching out to touch the wall. How could it? At this moment, even Han Shan himself began to waver. Was it really a hallucination he had? No, absolutely not. The next moment, a pair of deep green eyes that made him tremble appeared in his mind, and he quickly shook his head vigorously. How could a hallucination be so clear, so real, so logical? Besides, he saw 2 bodies last night, blood all over the floor. Wait, blood? Han Shan's face suddenly changed, and his eyes showed ecstasy. Blood, yes, the blood on the ground. I fell to the ground at that time, and I might have gotten blood on me. Damn, he forgot to restrain himself in his excitement, and suddenly turned his head to look at the young policeman. I have evidence. You must believe me. This time it's true. He turned around and ran, almost sprinting. Given his unstable mental state, the young policeman hurriedly chased after him. Where are you going? To the hospital, for a blood test. The wall clock pointed to 11 in the morning. Bai Yi finally lazily opened his eyes and got up from the bed. He routinely cut off power for 5 minutes before fully waking up. Then, he stretched a comfortable stretch. These past few nights were rare in many years where he didn't have nightmares and slept till dawn. Ever since the nightmare game started, he finally didn't have to fall into the fragments of nightmares every night when he went to sleep, but could choose whether to enter them. And the previous 3 nights, he chose not to enter fragments of nightmares. Last night, he also equipped the only character card, K, and put on a good show outside. The murmuring whispers in his mind did not ruin his good mood at all. Bai Yi went into the kitchen, humming a song happily while making breakfast, or lunch. Are you happy? He hummed a song, picked up a fish from the fish tank, shook the fish's head, then, smack, it landed on the chopping board. I am very happy tilde. Quote ellipsis quote. The fish rolled its dead fish eyes. Happiness actually has no reason, let me tell you tilde. While humming the song, Bai Yi waved a shiny kitchen knife. Do you like this new kitchen knife I bought? Whoosh. I think you must like it. The blade was as fast as cutting a piece of soft tofu, drawing a quite dangerous trajectory in midair. With one cut, it peacefully passed away. Happiness is such an easy thing, Tilda. Bai Yi's actions and tone became more and more cheerful, and he didn't forget to mutter in the gaps of humming songs, as if treating a good friend. So what about this new flavor of sauce? This is carefully blended according to your body shape and meat quality, privately customized, and it must match your meat. Sure enough, you look very satisfied. So, it's decided. The golden oil in the iron pan sizzled, accompanied by a strange smell that filled the air. Not far from the window, a sparrow suddenly fell headlong from an electric pole, fell into the bushes, and didn't react for a long time. Its eyes were dazed. Caught off guard and suffered a fatal blow. JPG. The remaining few sparrows flew away skillfully at the first sign of movement from the kitchen window. Seeing their newly joined companion suffer such a heavy blow, their wings flapped even harder. There should be background music here. Demon King's entrance BGM.mp3. After Bai Yi finished breakfast, he remembered what he had done last night and prepared to see how it turned out. A flash of light in his palm, and a card slowly condensed. However, in such a short time, it shouldn't be so fast. Bai Yi raised his eyebrows in surprise, and couldn't help but weigh the card in his hand. Although only one night had passed, the feeling this card gave him now had a subtle difference. It was as if it had become a little bit more real. It was really just a little bit. This extremely subtle change might not be noticed by ordinary people, but Bai Yi, whose mental power was different from that of ordinary people, caught it at the first moment. He was very curious and looked down at the card. We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 9. A progress bar had mysteriously appeared at the top of the card. It was like the experience level bar in a game, and now there was a hint of blue at the far left. The progress bar was marked in the middle with Legend degree 0.1%. Sure enough, my thinking was correct. The legend degree is all about making things happen. Bai Yi immediately laughed with satisfaction. As he happily played with the card in his hand, the progress bar in front of him began to skyrocket. In just a few minutes, it had become 1%, and it was still rising. This gave Bai Yi a little surprise. He had only tried the effect of equipping the character card for the first time, and he hadn't even started to make a serious mess yet. The growth of the legend degree was so unexpected. It seemed that the lucky customer not only willingly became a test subject but also kindly helped him with some publicity. Moreover, it spread so quickly in just one morning, it was obviously not just simple word of mouth. Bai Yi thoughtfully opened his phone. He quickly saw the news published today on a local news and entertainment official account. Daily Fun News V. #man drunkenly reports false murder case #. At 9 o'clock this morning, a man reported that he had accidentally entered a murder scene, encountered a psychopathic killer, and 2 victims had been killed. He narrowly escaped with his life. After investigation by the Yuanyang City Public Security Bureau, it was found that there was no such thing. It is possible that the man had hallucinations after drinking and mistook them for reality. According to a reporter's investigation, the reporter Han had been drinking in a bar until the early hours of the morning, was in a state of drunkenness, and had fought with someone. He had a head injury and braved the rain to go home at night. At 8 o'clock this morning, he was found unconscious on the street, with a high fever, and was sent to the hospital. After waking up, Han immediately called the police, claiming to have encountered a murder case, and provided a description of the murder scene. The police verified that there was no place that matched the description. Han did not give up and is still actively looking for evidence. Here, the official kindly reminds all citizens, drink in moderation. Drunkenness harms the body and the mind. Try not to walk alone at night after drinking, and pay attention to safety. The news was followed by a detailed video link, including Han's description of his experience that night in the news. By this time, several hours had passed since the news was published, and the comment section was completely occupied by silly netizens. 23,333 these days, all kinds of silly things are popping up. Breaking into a room to kill, killing 2 at a time, and finally sparing a drunk with 0 combat power. Do you think I would believe it? TL, 23333 equals lol. This guy must have watched too many movies, thinking he was in a movie after getting drunk. So let me just say it, the villain setting is too strong, the protagonist setting is too trash, and in the end, he can only survive by being spared by the villain. The plot is extremely stupid, it's bound to flop. Speaking of which, could it really be some kind of novel movie promotion? It's not impossible considering the integrity of those movie companies. An inn on a rainy night, a psychopathic killer, and a blonde beauty. I really can. Tilda. I just want to say, it's fine for such people to waste social resources by living, but can they not cause trouble for the police station? Do you know how many important things the police have to deal with every day? Can you shake off the alcohol in your brain before reporting? Everyone's reaction was the same. They simply didn't believe what Hanshan said in the video. If there really was such an inn, could it disappear overnight? So, this was nothing more than a drunkard's delusion. As the silly netizens in the comment section spoke, the legend degree progress bar on the ghost in the rainy night card was slowly increasing. Bai Yi watched the video from beginning to end. Hanshan's reaction at the beginning was not unexpected, and the police's actions were even less surprising. But when he saw the end, he found that after the unsuccessful report, Hanshan actually took his clothes from that night to the hospital for a blood test, even though the hospital did not agree. He could actually think of this, he's a bit smarter than I originally thought. Bai Yi stroked his chin, his eyes full of anticipation. The entire scene, along with the bodies and blood, were all fictitious constructs of the nightmare crystal. After the character card and the scene were taken back together, would the blood that had stained the other party still exist? Would it disappear along with the scene, or would it become real? Even he was very curious. If in the end no result could be obtained, and there was no stranger's blood at all, would that guy be hit so hard that he would doubt life and have some mental problems? When everyone denies the truth of a matter, and there are countless pieces of evidence that can prove its falsehood, what can be used to define the so-called true and false? Just like when the whole world thinks you're crazy, how do you prove that you're sane? Maybe even you start to doubt whether you're normal. Bai Yi's gaze fell on the progress bar on the card. Although the news about the ghost in the rainy night had already spread, because the information was not yet complete and the situation of this card had not been fully outlined in everyone's mind, and people did not believe the truth of this matter, the increase in the legend degree was almost negligible. You said before that increasing the legend degree can make the illusory scene gradually become real. So, if the legend degree is enough, it shouldn't be a problem to make a few drops of blood become real, right? Bai Yi summoned the nightmare game system. The current legend degree is enough to transform a part of the fictitious scene into reality, and the degree of transformation is equivalent to the percentage of the legend degree. Currently, 3.7% can be transformed, but which part is transformed first is determined by the depth of the impression caused by the legend, and is not controlled by the system or the player. So, the most critical evidence in this matter, the existence of those few drops of blood, was completely in a state of Schrodinger's blood. TL, from Schrodinger's cat, discussing an uncertain state. If no one observes this uncertain state, it will always be an uncertainty. As long as someone observes, then this uncertain state will disappear, convert to a fixed state. The lucky customer he had chosen, in the end, either found nothing and fell into the pit of possibly having hallucinations, thus doubting life, or found the existence of strange blood but found the situation becoming more bizarre and strange, thus doubting life even more. Even he, the puppeteer behind the scenes, found it hard to predict. However, a story with an unknown direction was more interesting. Thinking about it, Bai Yi couldn't help but show a wickedly amusing expression. Now, things have become fun. At the same time, someone walked out of the hospital with a dejected look. Standing at the entrance of the hospital, Han Shan held the blood-stained clothes in his arms, his expression very ugly. No matter how he had wheedled and threatened, the hospital had not agreed to his request for a blood test. His request was really too difficult for people. He had been injured and bled before, and his clothes were already stained with blood. Then it was washed by the heavy rain, and the area of the bloodstains was even larger. Now, he insisted that there might be someone else's blood in such a large area of bloodstains, and asked the hospital to test it bit by bit, which was simply not a common trouble. If there really was a murder case, and the police stepped in, the hospital might agree to such a troublesome request. But now, apart from what Han Shan himself said, which was not known to be true or false, there was no other evidence. He personally went to the hospital for a blood test, and the hospital naturally didn't want to deal with it. They were practically looking at him as if he were mentally ill. Darn it. He couldn't help but punch the pillar next to him. His heart was both anxious and depressed, and he was filled with indescribable fear. The reason he was so persistent was not because he had such a strong sense of justice, but simply because, as soon as he thought of that psychopath who terrified him, he couldn't help but tense up, feeling both fear and anger. As long as that guy wasn't caught for a day, the shadow lingering in his heart would never dissipate. What's more, now that the news had somehow spread, perhaps that psychopathic murderer would come to take revenge on him. Han Shan shivered all over. I think I can try to find someone to test the blood. Just then, someone suddenly spoke up, interrupting the fear that had suddenly sprung up in his mind because of that thought. Han Shan was startled and turned around subconsciously, becoming even more surprised. Why is it you? The young man who suddenly appeared was in a police uniform, with a crew-cut, gentle and upright eyebrows, and still retained 80% of his good looks under this hairstyle. It was that young policeman. Li Fufeng smiled, didn't answer, just reached out his hand, indicating for him to hand over the blood-stained clothes. If you're willing, you can give it to me. I'll find someone to test the blood. Han Shan looked at him uncertainly. You believe what I said? I can tell that you're not lying, and I can see that you're really scared right now. Li Fufeng pondered, whether it's true or just a false alarm. In any case, if there really is a murderer, we'll arrest him. If not, then you can rest assured. He said this in a jokingly relaxed tone. As a law-abiding citizen, being so fearful within our jurisdiction, this is my dereliction of duty. We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 10. The car accident in the old city 3 days ago? Li Fufeng returned to the police station after his fieldwork, and before he could bring up the matter of blood testing, he heard about another case. He frowned immediately. It wasn't an accident, but man-made. It's been confirmed that it wasn't an accident, although the murderer devised it very cleverly, leaving almost no flaws. Even the driver involved in the accident didn't know he was set up, thinking it was his own carelessness that caused the accident. Lu Ningxuang, who was next to him, handed him a cup of water and shook her head. To harm such a well-respected good person in this way, I really don't know what deep hatred there is. Moreover, the murderer's method of committing the crime is so skilled, it's likely a veteran. Saying this, she turned her gaze to the transparent plastic bag in Li Fufeng's hand, and the blood-stained clothes in the bag. She almost immediately understood his intention. Don't tell me, you really believe that drunkard's nonsense? As the youngest policewoman in the Yuanyang City Police Station, Lu Ningxuang's personality was a stark contrast to her poetic name, a gap between a goddess and a neurotic goddess. On the contrary, Li Fufeng was just like his name. This pair of buddies, with names like the male and female leads in a martial arts novel, perfectly embody the characteristics of a martial arts novel protagonist, full of chivalry, highly skilled in martial arts, with Li Fufeng corresponding to the first half and Lu Ningxuang to the second half. The reason for their close relationship was entirely due to their parents, who had known each other for many years and were equally obsessed with martial arts novels, giving their children the same style of names. So, even though she thought Li Fufeng's matter was very unreliable and a waste of effort, Lu Ningxuang still took the plastic bag to solidify their friendship that had lasted for many years. Forget it, big good guy, I'll help you with this, remember, you already owe me 3 meals. She held up 3 fingers and muttered, looks like I have to deal with that jerk again. If I could, I really wouldn't want to go. If you don't treat me to a good meal this time, I'm going to be at a loss. Don't worry, you won't be shortchanged, Li Fufeng swore solemnly. Temporarily putting aside a worry in his heart, Li Fufeng's attention returned to the case just now. He asked, has the murderer of the car accident been caught? Not yet, but we already have some clues, and now that you're back, we might have results soon. Bai Yi woke up to the sound of crying. After sending off the fish he had raised for several days with a grand ceremony and burying it in his own 5 Zhang temple, he took a nap and slept in the afternoon. T.N. 5 Zhang temple refers to the human internal organs. Then, he was awakened by the increasingly loud crying outside the window. The cries of many people mixed together. People had gathered on the street at some unknown time. A long funeral procession passed in front of everyone. The elderly living in this old city area were almost all startled, standing on both sides of the street or at their doorsteps, watching this scene. Almost everyone's gaze fell on the 2 old people. They cried until they almost collapsed on the ground, tears and snot flowing, their faces wrinkled and trembling, their white hair messy. They were about to faint from crying. A young girl in mourning clothes stood between the 2, supporting them on either side so they wouldn't fall. Her beautiful face was expressionless, but her eyes were red. Poor thing, so young, how could this happen? How are the 2 old people going to live? Ah, who could have thought this would happen? Teacher Ji Yu was such a good person, and he just left like that. It's all the fault of that damn driver. Why didn't he kill himself too? You can't blame the driver. No one wants this kind of thing. It's just fate. Old Ji Yu and his wife have done good deeds all their lives. Teacher Ji Yu was also a good person. I heard he even donated money to support so many children. The child in his family, he adopted her after her parents died, right? Ah, good people just don't live long. Various discussions floated through the crowd. Countless streams of information, like iron sand attracted by a magnet, involuntarily converged towards Bai Yi. Grief, regret, despair, hatred, and pleasure. In the end, all emotions were surrounded by intense joy, like a chocolate mixed with various fillings, sweet on the outside, but strained when bitten into. This joyous emotion far exceeded everyone else. Bai Yi looked up in a certain direction. Suddenly someone came over. Bai Yi, you're here too? Remember, Teacher Ji Yu used to teach you? Bai Yi looked at the woman who was talking. She was the owner of the shop where he often bought vegetables. Her surname was Li. The fish that he had solemnly buried at noon today was from her shop. Out of respect for the fish, he nodded. I only stayed in Teacher Gu's class for half a month, then I applied for home self-study. His tone carried a hint of regret. I didn't expect something like this to happen to Teacher Ji Yu. If it weren't for this person's reminder, he almost forgot that he was a high school student studying at home. And Teacher Ji Yu, the woman seemed to want to say something else, but the man next to her pulled her arm, and she was somewhat dissatisfied. I didn't say anything, just asking if Teacher Ji Yu had offended anyone. I heard from old Ji Yu that it seems this matter is not that simple. Enough, the person is dead, what's the point of saying these things? Her husband seemed very reluctant to speak ill of the dead. This man, who was always honest, silent, and only knew how to make money, rarely stood up to his wife. Really, you're the only one who understands things. The woman complained in a low voice, but couldn't help but bring up the topic again. You said that old Ji Yu and his wife only have one son. What are they going to do now that he's gone? Although they have a granddaughter, she's not their own. How can she be as close and filial as their own granddaughter? Just then, there was a sudden commotion in the crowd, followed by a slap. Everyone else's attention was drawn over. You evil spirit, your father was killed by you. If it weren't for you leaving home in a huff, your father wouldn't have gone out to look for you in the middle of the night, and he wouldn't have been hit by a car. The old Mrs. Gu, who had been crying so hard that she couldn't catch her breath, was now glaring at the young girl. If it weren't for the other people around her holding her back in time, it looked like she was going to hit her again. The young girl, on the other hand, reached out a hand to cover her face and stood there expressionless. She was thin and silent. Mrs. Gu, who had lost control of her emotions, was still cursing relentlessly. Let go of me. It's this girl who killed my son. You killed your own parents, killed my daughter-in-law, and now you're here to harm my son. Damn it. The old Mr. Gu, who seemed slightly calmer, finally couldn't help but stop her. He looked around and said in a deep voice, this has nothing to do with Tianchen. Tianchen has always been filial. Don't you also like this girl very much usually? Let's go home first. Don't make a fool of ourselves outside. The other people around also began to persuade her. Finally, the emotional old Mrs. Gu calmed down a bit. The young girl called Tianchen also stepped forward. I'm sorry, Grandma. She bowed her head, her voice was also hesitant. After all, she was a retired teacher, and Mrs. Gu had lost her temper with her in a moment of grief. Now that she had come to her senses, she also regained her rationality, tightly holding the young girl's cold hands. I was confused. I'm sorry, I shouldn't blame you. How could your father just leave us like this? Thinking of her son who had passed away prematurely, she held her granddaughter in her arms, crying inconsolably. Seeing the family regain harmony and the funeral procession continuing to move forward, the onlookers seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. That's right, life has to go on. Seeing this, the woman standing next to Bai Yi showed a satisfied expression as if she had seen a happy ending in a TV drama. Oh, that's right, Bai Yi, you're still here? At this moment, she seemed to finally notice the young man standing next to her, quickly putting on a warm smile, feeling a bit strange in her heart. She didn't know why she had ignored him just now. Logically speaking, this child's appearance should not be ignored. Could it be that she was starting to have memory problems in advance? Fortunately, the thought of making money allowed her to break through some unknown buff, remembering this long-term patron of their business, and she enthusiastically started talking. We just got a bucket of fresh carp from the countryside yesterday, as well as eels and loaches. They're so fresh and lively. If you're interested, I can give you a 10% discount. Okay, how lively? Bai Yi was interested. Half an hour later, after careful selection, the most lively fish stood out from the crowd, winning a private custom sauce bath, oil bath, and a luxurious burial reservation. Humming a song, Bai Yi returned home. He opened the tablet computer on the living room sofa, skillfully logged into an account, and found a remittance prompt. You have received 5,000 yuan. We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 11. In this rapidly developing city, which was expected to become the second largest metropolis in Yaguo country apart from the capital, the existence of the old city symbolized the last history of Yuanyan City. It was like the elderly who lived here, half buried in the earth, who would sooner or later be abandoned by the new era. And this car accident, on the contrary, made this place, which was so quiet that it was almost forgotten, noisy for the first time. In the following days, the noise continued. Relatives, friends, students of the GU family, all kinds of acquaintances rushed over when they heard the news, causing Bai Yi's mind to be filled with even more chaotic and noisy voices. Fortunately, such noise was only temporary. Bai Yi simply stayed at home, entering dreams during the day to explore the nightmare game. It was still that familiar, suffocating deep sea, as thick as ink, as dark as night, with fragments of stars scattered in the ocean surrounding him. Until he gently touched one of them. Then, he woke up in a nightmare. It seemed that even after loading the nightmare game, Bai Yi still couldn't actively choose which nightmare fragment to enter. Just like before, he would wake up randomly in any dream, on any person. The only difference was that in the past, he was aimless in his dreams. He could only do anything based on his own guesses until he stumbled upon a solution. As time went on, Bai Yi realized that the key to ending the nightmare cycle lay in the role he entered. Only by following the wishes deep in the character's heart, fulfilling the character's desires, and turning the nightmare into a beautiful dream, would the dream completely leave him and stop entangling him repeatedly. And after the nightmare game system was activated, Bai Yi didn't need to rack his brains to guess. The moment he woke up in the nightmare fragment, the game system revealed the conditions for clearing the game. You are the owner of a flower shop. This flower shop is ordinary, business is okay. It is one of the many flower shops in the city, not noticeable. Relying on the income of the flower shop, you barely make ends meet. You live a life that is not enough for the upper class, but more than enough for the lower class. But you were not satisfied with this. Running a flower shop was your dream. Every flower was planted, cared for, and sent out by your own hands. You hoped they could bring happiness to every customer, and you hoped that the flowers you planted yourself would be loved and praised by everyone. Task: collect sincere praise from 1,000 customers. The system's narration ended, and the familiar player panel appeared. Name: Bai Yi. Age: 17. Talent: rhythm of all things LV10, awakening 10%. Life skills, not shown below LV1. Bewitch LV3. Dark cooking LV2. Iron stomach LV2. Personality mask LV1. Extraordinary skills, praise of the blind LV1. Points: 20 slot, ghost of rainy night. Backpack: nightmare crystal, white, ×4, principle of all things ×1. Bai Yi woke up on a quiet lounge chair. The warm sunlight poured in from the transparent glass door, falling on him. The air was filled with a faint floral scent, which made him feel sleepy again. This task is unexpected. If it had been before the nightmare game started, he would never have guessed that the final clearance condition would be like this, no matter what. In the end, he would inevitably spend a lot of time in the dream, being entangled by such a dream for half a month. So, the system is not completely useless. He stood up from the lounge chair, stretched lazily, and his gaze swept over the pink, white, yellow, purple, all kinds of flowers in the shop that he couldn't name and could only roughly distinguish by color, showing a troubled expression. I'm good at making flower cakes, but growing flowers is not within my skills. If the role this time is a pastry chef, and I need to use the flower cakes I make to win the praise of 1,000 customers, I can clear it in one go. At this moment, Bai Yi was inexplicably confident, very inflated. Regardless of whether his confidence was reasonable or not, this task obviously did not meet his assumption. With a regretful sigh, Bai Yi pushed open the slightly ajar door of the flower shop, smiled at the ordinary face on the transparent glass door, and walked towards the nearest shop next door. To make the flowers in the shop a token of happiness, to harvest sincere praise from customers, then first, you need to understand who are potential customers, find out who can be converted into customers, and explore their inner needs. Set a small goal first, take over the street. For several days in a row, Bai Yi was immersed in the friend interaction game. Although he was not a person who was keen on making friends, as long as he wanted to, he could become the most understanding friend of anyone in the shortest time. After the nightmare game system went online, the biggest convenience it brought him was that he could choose to enter and exit the nightmare game at any time, in other words, save and load. This made it more convenient for him to brush up on instances. You use Bewitch LV3, gain friendly unit +1. You use Bewitch LV3, NPC friendliness +10. You use Bewitch LV3, neighborhood reputation +50. You gained a large amount of experience. Bewitch skill has been upgraded to the limit of life skills, cannot be further upgraded. If this were a traditional single-player game, then by now, Bai Yi's game panel would probably have been flooded with such information. After Bai Yi expanded his circle of friends to the entire street in the game, along with these new friends' relatives and friends, and their relatives and friends, the seemingly unreachable task of gathering 1,000 praises was far exceeded. Perhaps, this was the talent of a pyramid scheme leader? Resolving the knots between people, allowing lovers who had a crush on each other to finally become a couple, letting a mother and son with misunderstandings resolve their differences, letting an old man on his sickbed reunite with his brother after many years of separation, leaving no regrets. The originally healing style game, under Bai Yi's operation, turned into a strange style of rapidly developing downlines. The lovers who finally became a couple turned into the shop owner's loyal fans, helping out in the shop daily, and crazily recommending the hashtag gentle and understanding shop owner hash and his hashtag flowers that convey the feelings between lovers, the symbol of happiness hash to their friends. The old mother who reconciled with her son seemed to have been bewitched, praising the magical flower shop owner to everyone she met, as if he had some magic that could make the old and frail rejuvenate. So she brought a group of elderly people to buy flowers, and some even wanted to introduce their daughters and nieces to the still single shop owner. The old man who reunited with his brother left without regrets, and on his deathbed, he didn't forget to recommend to his hospital friends, as if the shop owner had become the messenger sent by the god in his heart, the omnipotent incarnation that can solve everyone's regrets. In this way, when submitting the save to clear the game, Bai Yi had already opened 3 branches with the help of customers, and if he continued to develop, he was likely to become the industry leader. Successfully cleared the nightmare fragment, flowers and wishes. Dungeon level. Clearance evaluation, S. Points earned, 10. Unlocked achievement, what is your wish? Explanation. You understand the human heart and develop downlines smoothly. Being able to turn running a flower shop into something like preaching is also a unique talent. If you are willing, you can establish a cult in minutes and have countless fanatical followers cheer for you. You fool the world, but also redeem the world. You are a god that exists in people's hearts. Start special reward extraction. You get a special drop, Nightmare Crystal, white ×1. You get a new 1-star character card, Flower Speaker, with a built-in scene template, ordinary flower shop. Due to the player's actions in the Nightmare Fragment dungeon, should it be integrated into the achievement and automatically generate characteristics? Hint. This character is a 1-star ordinary character card. Integrating achievements will have a 90% chance of generating extraordinary characteristics. Awakening from the Nightmare game, Bai Yi looked at the lines of text hanging in front of him, somewhat surprised. In the past few days of exploring the Nightmare game, he had already cleared many Nightmare fragments that were not difficult at all of which were very daily tasks. In the end, he only obtained 1 Nightmare Crystal, white, and 10 points. He had thought that this task of running a flower shop would be no exception. Unexpectedly, not only was the reward equivalent to the sum of those from previous Nightmare fragments, but he also obtained another character card. The most surprising thing was the so-called achievements and extraordinary characteristics. As for whether to integrate achievements and automatically generate characteristics, was this question even worth considering? Is this question even worth considering? The facts have now proven that Han Shan did not lie that day. At least, what he said was not entirely false. We certainly need to investigate. Just based on a few drops of suspicious blood of unknown origin, without any other evidence, and without any missing persons report, this is a bit too far-fetched. But these few drops of human blood, which cannot find any matching information in the national DNA database, are enough to prove that he indeed encountered something unusual that night. My intuition tells me that there is something going on here. It's not simple. In the police station, Li Fufeng rarely argued with his colleagues. When he initially agreed to help Han Shan test the blood, he was just out of goodwill, hoping to reassure him after the results came out. But even he didn't expect that he would actually find a stranger's blood on the other person's clothes. This made the situation become strange. Assuming that Han Shan did encounter a murder case that night, the murderer could certainly escape, the body could be destroyed, but an inn, such a conspicuous building, couldn't disappear overnight, could it? But if all this was just his illusion, how could he explain these few drops of human blood of unknown origin? Li Fufeng always felt that there was something strange about this, and wanted to persuade his colleagues to investigate together, but the others didn't take this seriously, thinking that he was thinking too much. Just at this moment, several police officers who had gone out to investigate returned. Lu Ningxuang ran in front, full of energy, clapped her hands, and attracted everyone's attention. Everyone, it's time to work. The culprit of that car accident has been found. We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hgabvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 12. Although he had obtained a new card, Bai Yi did not consider himself a person who was fond of the new and tired of the old. Moreover, the card, Ghost in the Rainy Night, had not yet completed its mission. As a person who had been forced to accept various chaotic information streams for a long time, good and bad, sweet and bitter, dirty and smelly, all crammed into his head, but still lived strongly to the present, his psychology was still normal, he had not become abnormal and he considered himself a very lively and positive good citizen. Bai Yi had always been committed to quietly eliminating those stinky garbage that would cause him mental pollution in his own way. The old city area today was an environment that he had worked hard for many years, carefully selected for himself, and built that was still acceptable. But outside the old city area, those garbage that had once left a deep impression on Bai Yi and still emitted a stench, the progress of cleaning was extremely slow, and there was still too much waiting to be cleaned. Before the Nightmare game system went online, Bai Yi could only choose a slow and roundabout way. But the launch of the system, and the appearance of the card, Ghost in the Rainy Night, made him realize that he seemed to have a simpler, more brutal, and more convenient and quick choice. A ghostly figure, unrelated to himself on the surface, killing as simple as eating and drinking, wasn't it the most convenient choice for a big cleanup? Therefore, he entered the Nightmare game during the day these days, and Bai Yi was not idle at night. Before going to sleep, he would always equip the Ghost in the Rainy Night card and walk around those stinky garbage that he had long noted in his notebook. What bad thoughts could Bai Yi have? It was just to step on the spot in advance, so it would be more convenient to clean up at that time. The characteristic of appearing anytime in the rainy night certainly restricted this card to only appear in the rainy night, but it also meant that as long as it was a place where it rained, he could appear at any time. Bai Yi only needed to choose the location according to the weather that night, and he could throw this card into any place where it rained. Because Bai Yi did not deliberately hide his tracks in the past few days, many people have seen such a figure strolling on the streets of Yuanyang City at night. Black clothes, black umbrella, light golden hair, an elegant temperament with an unclear face, these elements combined together were enough to make people impressed and couldn't help but take a few more glances. The legend degree rose slowly and subtly. That night was no different. As usual, Bai Yi controlled the Ghost in the Rainy Night card to make a round on the street, and Bai Yi, canceled the card equipment in a quiet corner without surveillance and disappeared on the spot. On the second floor of the apartment in the old city area, the illusory card condensed in the palm of his hand and slowly disappeared. Bai Yi, lying on the bed, closed his eyes, ready to sleep. Before falling asleep, he faintly heard the sound of a police siren outside the window. Then, there was the noisy sound of every household hearing the movement and running out to watch the excitement. There were women's screams, old people's curses, and unbelievable cries. Various information flowed, like leaves swept up by the wind, and came straight to Bai Yi's crown. Oh, has the last garbage in this city been cleaned up? Bai Yi didn't get up, but rolled around on the bed. 3 seconds later, he couldn't help but roll again. In the extremely joyful mood, the noisy, chaotic, harsh and sharp sounds in his mind seemed to become much more pleasant, not so unbearable. He fell asleep with a joyful mood. When Bai Yi opened the curtains against the daylight, he found that there were already quite a few people downstairs. According to these people's usual biological clocks, half of them shouldn't have gotten up so early. He went downstairs, with that forever sleepy expression, and yawned a big yawn. The young man's long eyelashes still had 2 drops of water on them, and he looked around in confusion. What happened? I went to bed very early yesterday. It seemed like there was a lot of noise outside. If he acted indifferent to such a big noise, it would be a bit strange. "Aw, you don't know?" Sure enough, soon someone who likes to gossip slapped their thigh. They said in a tone as if Bai Yi had missed 5 million in his sleep. "Last night the police came and took away the couple from the Li family. Do you know why? I guess you can't guess." Bai Yi shook his head very cooperatively. Immediately, the other party became more interested. Teacher Gu's car accident was not an accident, it was calculated. That Xiao Zhang is the murderer. Who could have thought of that? Without any grudges, he looks so honest and decent on a regular basis. Who could have thought that he dared to harm people like this? What Xiao Zhang? His real name is Lu Quan. Another old man came over. His voice was so loud that he wouldn't need a loudspeaker anymore. Didn't you hear what the police said? He is a vicious fugitive who has been on the run for murder 7 years ago. In the excitement, he raised his voice again, attracting everyone's attention all at once. Such a murderer was hiding among us, usually honest and only knew to work hard, sometimes being scolded and not talking back. So many people laughed at him behind his back, who knew he was such a ruthless person. Now thinking about it, it's scary. Other people were also scared, with a look of fear on their faces. Some people couldn't help their curiosity. Why did he suddenly attack Teacher Ji Yu for no reason? He's been hiding for 7 years, why suddenly so impulsive? What do we know about the thoughts of a murderer? Maybe he just couldn't help it, wanting to kill someone. Suddenly such a big thing happened. The residents of the old city area were all uneasy, plus the human nature of gossip. At this time they gathered together and started talking. Bai Yi was completely forgotten. At this time, someone shouted, "They're fighting, they're fighting. Old Ji Yu and them are fighting with Xiao Li." Someone ran over from the other end of the street, shouting as they ran. The voice came from afar. The crowd immediately scattered, swarming towards the direction the person was running from. Bai Yi was walking at the back, a distance away, taking his time. By the time he arrived, the 3 people who were fighting had been pulled apart by others, but they were all disheveled and in a sorry state. The lady boss with the surname Li, whom he had met just a few days ago, had several scratches on her face and arm from fingernails. Across from her, the white-haired old man Ji Yu and old lady Ji Yu were not much better, completely lacking the elegance of the former teacher, and instead looked somewhat mad. The old lady was struggling and still crying out, "Give me back my son, it's your man who killed my son," and so on. The others, who hadn't been held back, rushed up to fight again. Bai Yi looked at the few people who were fighting together, then looked at the shop behind him with the door half closed, and the empty shelves that could be vaguely seen through the crack in the door. On normal days, the shelves were always filled with the freshest and most vibrant fruits and vegetables. He pushed up the non-existent glasses on his nose bridge, pondered for 3 seconds, and concluded seriously, "It seems that I won't be able to buy vegetables today. Then I can only make do with cooking some noodles." Regretfully shaking his head, Bai Yi turned around and left. His gaze inadvertently swept over the crowd, and he saw a girl standing alone outside the crowd, looking confused and shocked. Lu Quan, on March 9, 2017, you broke into a house in Huayin City and killed a family of 4, then fled. On June 17, 2024, you planned a car accident to kill a teacher from the city's #1 middle school, Ji Yu Fengyu. You admit all of this, right? In the police station, an old policeman in his 40s, with a stern expression, was flipping through the interrogation record and speaking. 7 years later, why did you choose to attack Ji Yu Fengyu? What is your motive for murder? Why? The man sitting across slowly raised his head, his tone unwilling. Who let him discover my identity? I just want to live a peaceful life now. He wants to destroy all of this. I can only choose to kill him. Already discovered the identity of the fugitive, didn't report it at the first time, but let the other party notice and counter-kill. The experienced old policeman keenly realized that something was wrong here. Explain in detail from start to finish, starting with how you knew that Ji Yu Fengyu discovered your identity. Meanwhile, Bai Yi had a simple lunch and logged into the nightmare game again. His consciousness surfaced from the deep sea and woke up in the nightmare. He noticed that this body was sore all over, curled up on the ground in a self-protective posture, his head dizzy. The system's narration appeared in time. You are an ordinary boy with no special features. Average looks, average grades, nothing stands out. You have spent the 16 years of your life in mediocrity, enduring your father's scolding and endless bullying from others. You are the joke, toy, and punching bag in many people's hearts. Your existence has entertained their cheap and boring lives, enriching their extracurricular life. This day, you finally made up your mind to change yourself. The first step is to hone your courage and guts. You decide to casually kill someone. The narration got to this point. A low whisper like a horror game voiceover murmured in his ear, revealing a bit of unwillingness and madness. Anyone will do. I've had enough. Task, casually kill someone. Task completion degree is judged by the method of murder, the probability of being identified as the murderer, and the probability of being arrested. We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkdvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 13. Kill someone casually. This was indeed a task without any difficulty. However, considering the aim to maximize completion, simply killing a person and ending the first week would undoubtedly be a waste. I need to collect as much information as possible. Bai Yi, clutching his head, crawled up from the ground, his palm naturally reaching out to the wall next to him, paved with white tiles. His gaze naturally swept around the room. It looked like a school bathroom. In the mirror on the adjacent wall, a frail-looking teenager dressed in a large blue and white striped school uniform was reflected. His eyebrows and corners of his mouth were marked with obvious bruises and scrapes. His school uniform was dirty, with some areas stained with splashed water. He looked very disheveled. Through the messy and heavy bangs that were lifted, a pair of eyes that clearly did not match his temperament quietly observed everything, revealing an obvious color of contemplation in his pupils. The dazzling afternoon sun shone through the window on one side, clearly telling him that unless it was a holiday, it should be class time for students now. Bai Yi turned and walked towards the door. A phantom arrow timely appeared in midair. The system kindly pointed out the direction to the classroom after leaving the bathroom. On the way, information about this character naturally appeared in Bai Yi's mind. Xu Dong. Male. 16 years old. High school sophomore. One by one, small bubbles popped up in his mind. As for why he would appear in such a disheveled state during class time. For Xu Dong himself and the teachers and students of the school, his appearance in any disheveled state at any place in the school every day was not surprising. It was as normal as having 3 meals a day. This is the normal treatment for a toy. Sometimes, there were too many people who wanted to play with this toy in a single day. Perhaps he had to rush around 3 times a day, waking up in the bathroom in the morning, missing lunch because he was locked in the art room at noon, and being locked on the rooftop to feel the cool breeze at night. The power of habit was strong. When something happened every day, even if some people thought it was wrong at first, over time, they gradually saw it as a part of the normal world. Perhaps if it didn't happen one day, they would find it strange. Everything that happened to Xu Dong had long been taken for granted by everyone, and they even couldn't be bothered to guess in what state he would appear today. When the boy with water stains on his clothes appeared at the classroom door, it only drew a dismissive glance from others. Even the teacher who was lecturing just paused for a moment, skillfully and naturally instructed, "Xu Dong, you're late. Go back to your seat first, don't disturb everyone." The boy responded as usual, silently walked through the aisle between the desks and chairs, stepped over a foot that someone suddenly stretched out, and quickly scanned the classroom. A phantom arrow pointed straight to an empty seat in the corner of the last row of the classroom, and Bai Yi walked over. Then, he took out a black leather notebook from the crumpled bag on his seat, sat down and started writing vigorously. Group A, Row 1, Seat 1, male, has a certain hostility towards Xu Dong, judged from his height and appearance, possibly due to inner inferiority. Suspected to like the girl sitting next to him, can be used. Group A, row 1, seat 2, female, has a cold and ignoring attitude towards Shudong, judged from her clothes. Her family is not wealthy. The hairpin on her head obviously exceeds the affordable economic quota, observed to be very cherished. Suspected to be a gift from an important person, can be used. Group A, row 2, seat 1. In just one class period, Bai Yi had roughly observed everyone in the classroom and recorded the preliminary information in this black letter notebook. During the break, Bai Yi casually glanced at the seating chart and everyone's names near the podium, and then corresponded these names with the codes in the notebook. There was still an hour and a half before school was over in the afternoon. It was enough for him to continue observing and preliminarily verifying his conclusions. He began to seemingly casually strike up conversations with the NPCs around him that he had marked as cold. Under the effect of the praise of the blind passive aura and bewitch LV3, the NPC's coldness quickly turned into friendliness, even though this passively increased friendliness was very limited. It didn't take long for Bai Yi to get the information he wanted from these NPCs, and he made appropriate modifications and supplements to the entries in the notebook. For example, he identified the main people who used Shudong as a toy on weekdays, determined which of the people he was currently observing could be used, and who was most suitable for completing the task. Others were unaware of this, but they felt a bit strange. Today's Shudong doesn't seem so annoying. Strange, why did I find him annoying before? But such puzzling thoughts were fleeting and did not continue to ponder. When Bai Yi no longer actively tried to talk to others, under the effect of praise of the blind, his own sense of existence was instantly reduced to the extreme, no longer attracting attention. This saved him a lot of unnecessary trouble. In the evening, Jingchuan left the school gate. Today you didn't see, when Shu Dongdong came in from outside, that ghostly appearance. He and a few boys around him were gesticulating and laughing, full of schadenfreude. If you ask me, there's nothing fun about Shu Dongdong. Every time he just has that gloomy ghostly appearance. And today's routine is already old. Some people found it boring. When will there be something fresh? The boy who spoke was very tall, unusually burly among his peers. The people around him obviously followed his lead. As soon as he spoke impatiently, several boys, including Jingchuan, nodded in agreement. Boss Fang is right. It's really a bit boring to play like this all the time. And Shu Dongdong, he only knows how to play turtle. It's not interesting to play. Arriving at a park near the school, the boys quickly dismissed the shrinking turtle they mentioned, and took out a soccer ball from their backpacks. This park, originally planned as a key city construction project but later abandoned for unknown reasons, had a large open space. It had long been occupied by them as a soccer field for after-school play. Not until dusk fell and the sunset was almost gone, did the sweaty boys finally finish playing soccer. They each picked up their backpacks and ran towards their homes. Jingchuan went west alone, taking a different route from the others. He bought a bottle of iced soda at the snack shop he passed by every day on his way home. Just after paying the bill, his gaze inadvertently swept over a familiar figure. The girl had taken off her large and ugly school uniform jacket, revealing her undeveloped figure. She had undone her original hairstyle, and her black and straight long hair fell down, without any decoration, naturally exuding the charm of youth. She stood under a street lamp opposite the snack shop, her body sideways to the side, her gaze on the phone in her hand, occasionally looking around, seemingly waiting for someone. The sky was extremely dark, the light from the street lamp shone on her fair profile, and she looked very anxious. A good student who goes home on time every day after school, how could she suddenly appear here? Who was she waiting for? Jingchuan subconsciously walked out of the snack shop, hid behind a tree at the shop door, and quietly looked across the street. Then, his eyes widened in shock. A figure walked out from behind the tree shadow of the street lamp, came to the girl, seemed to give her something, and the two laughed and talked for a while. The atmosphere seemed very harmonious. Shu, Dong, Dong. Jingchuan suddenly clenched his fists, his eyes blazing with fire. Shock, astonishment, and a certain indescribable sense of humiliation all surged up at the same time. He watched as the two said goodbye and parted ways, the girl's figure disappearing in another direction. He immediately ran across the road, chasing after the other person, and followed him. Jingchuan chased him directly into an alley nearby. The last bit of sunset had already sunk. He didn't know if it was because it was too dark, or the other person was too fast, but in a blink of an eye, that person was gone. In the alley without street lights, Jingchuan chased for a while, gasping for breath, and vaguely saw a blurry shadow ahead. Shu Dongdong, stop. He suddenly found the strength, running and shouting at the same time. The next moment, a gust of wind came from the side. Jingchuan, who was running, felt his face being scraped painfully. Bang. A heavy brick hit him squarely in the face, making him dizzy. He instinctively fell to the side, reaching out to brace himself against the uneven wall. Before he could recover from the dizziness and see who had attacked him and where the brick had come from, a figure lightly jumped down from the top of the wall, took a few steps over, and there was another brick. This one hit him squarely on the forehead. Jingchuan felt his forehead was dizzy and painful, and he passed out directly. Bai Yi squatted down, not reassured, and added another brick. Only when he was sure that he was really unconscious, did he feel relieved. He threw away the brick, and his palm lightly patted with joy. Just like a trainer who had successfully captured a wild Pokemon. Aha, capture success, full tilde. Then, Bai Yi headed straight for a corner of the alley not far ahead. There, a tree growing slantingly from the outside stretched its sturdy branches in, and an empty blue and white school uniform was hung there, gently swaying in the evening breeze. In the dim night, looking from the special perspective of the alley entrance, it looked like a blurry figure. Bai Yi took off the school uniform, walked back to the person who had fallen on the ground, directly used the school uniform as a rope to tightly bind the person's hands, and brutally dragged him deeper into the alley. Jingchuan's phone somehow appeared in his hand. In the screen that had been unlocked by fingerprint, a communication interface was opened, and many familiar names scrolled by. Classmates, teachers, parents. Bai Yi finished reading the conversations with other people on the phone within a week, and started typing on the phone, imitating Jingchuan's tone. Who should be the next capture target? Tian. Shu Dong is the real name. Shu Dongdong should be the nickname given by his classmates, bullies. We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 14. Cold, trembling, oh no, that's wrong. Let's do it again. Action. A strange, deep melody echoed in the darkness. Dark, damp, dizzy, weak. When Jingchuan woke up from a severe headache, he was horrified to find himself hanging upside down in the air in a strange posture, like a string of sausages hung up to dry. He tried to struggle, but his hands and feet, bound by ropes, betrayed him first, unable to cooperate with his brain. A damp sensation came from the sparse hair on his head. His brain, which was not very smart to begin with and became even more stupid due to overheating, seemed to be stimulated by the coolness and regained a bit of clarity. Of course, only a bit, it couldn't possibly be more. This was the upper limit determined by intelligence. He rolled his eyes to look down. The music was very cooperative, a sudden stop, like the moment when the protagonist in a horror game suddenly encounters a door kill. Ah tilde how terrible. Jingchuan's heart skipped a beat. At this time, the stupid him finally realized that just below his head was a medium-sized indoor swimming pool. From any perspective, the area and depth of the pool were enough to accommodate his entire head, with plenty to spare. In the dark environment, the water surface faintly glowed. And now, his sparse hair had already made intimate contact with the water surface of the pool. Oh, this might have contaminated the pool water to some extent. The person who planned all this felt very sorry. Let's get back to the point. Even the most stupid person should realize their situation. Of course, Jingchuan was not out of this range. Fear, anger, and more elusive emotions bombarded his brain, and his face turned red due to congestion. After looking around for the culprit to no avail, he finally couldn't control himself and yelled out loud. Shut up, I'm telling you to shut up. Jingchuan's face was distorted, almost losing his composure as he roared. Oh, this isn't very friendly. A qualified protagonist would always cooperate with the narrator's performance, not destroy the atmosphere. Unfortunately, our protagonist didn't understand this. Jingchuan, who was hanging upside down in midair, suddenly dropped a centimeter, his hair completely soaked in the pool. Who is it? Who's playing tricks? Get the hell out here. You're dead, you know, you're dead. The sudden change in the dangerous environment greatly stimulated the fear in Jingchuan's heart, and he chose to cover it up with harsh words. He tried to make himself look like a tiger ready to pounce, rather than a Hello Kitty being manipulated. But we all know what the truth is. Unfortunately, our protagonist seemed unable to accept the blunt truth, and he became even more irritable. Jingchuan was going crazy. These two opposing principles' strange narration kept drilling into his brain. Shu Dongdong, get out here. You think I can't recognize your voice? You think you can scare me by playing tricks? You wait for me. The height dropped again, and the water surface had reached his forehead. The cold chill made Jingchuan shudder all over. He finally picked up his not-so-smart brain, and for the sake of his cheap life, he temporarily learned to shut up. If he had always been so obedient and sensible, perhaps today's drama would not have been staged. To avoid the following plot being all about the fool's shouting or the coward's silence, this is too boring. The evil villain finally decided to make an appearance. The surrounding dull music suddenly became cheerful. It was like 10,000 frogs suddenly dancing together. The narrator's voice also became full of power. Let's have some applause. We need a more exciting and interesting plot. Clap, 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 clap. A series of rhythmic applause sounded, the lights above the ceiling lit up, and the light shone straight down. A person appeared under the shining light, nonchalantly clapping for his own appearance, and then waved at Jingchuan with a smile. Yo, Jingchuan. Congratulations, you didn't recognize the wrong person. I didn't expect that you could recognize my identity so quickly. Such deep affection really leaves me at a loss for words. His cheerful and surprised tone was like meeting an old friend in a foreign land after many years. As if he wasn't the one who hung the other party upside down here facing the threat of death. Jingchuan's anger gauge was almost overflowing. The dark environment, that neurotic cat and mouse-like narration, the constant threat of falling into death, the fear and repression that had been built up during this period of time suddenly dissipated a lot when he saw that familiar face, saw the remaining bruises and wounds on the other's face. He was like a cat that had finally been scratched by an overconfident mouse. After the shock, a sense of anger and humiliation sprang up in his heart. Even though this mouse seemed to have the power to kill the cat at this moment, the sense of superiority that had long been used to playing with it as a toy still made him ignore this. He was used to the absolute dominance in front of the other, and didn't believe that the long weak person dared to really do something to him. Shu Dongdong, are you crazy? Be careful, I'll kill you. Let me down now. Bai Yi completely ignored him, but continued to narrate on his own. Obviously, in our protagonist's narrow brain capacity, the smart IQ can't always occupy the high ground, just a brief moment to give up the throne, dominated by stupidity. Jingchuan, you. Bai Yi spoke with a passionate, enthusiastic voice, just like narrating for a superhero blockbuster. He knew nothing about his situation. But the evil villain will make him understand. As he said this, the expression on his face almost made people think that the next moment he would casually shout out a line like, Baralala energy little fairy transform. It made the onlookers feel so embarrassed that they couldn't help but dig out a luxurious villa. The last syllable fell, and the gear above the rope that bound Jingchuan's feet suddenly spun rapidly. His entire body plummeted, and his head, bang, hit the water. Water splashed everywhere, and the water surface had already submerged his neck. Jingchuan struggled desperately. Unfortunately, his hands and feet, which were tightly bound, once again betrayed his thoughts. 30 seconds later, the gear turned again, and he was lifted up, his forehead reconnected with the water surface. Huff, huff. Jingchuan was gasping heavily, like a fish out of water. This time, he couldn't speak, and he didn't dare to speak. At this moment, his eyes were full of fear. Even anger and hatred were hidden. The fierce tiger pretending to be calm finally tore off its mask. It turns out he's just a powerless Hello Kitty. His heart was as weak and powerless as his breath. This time, Jingchuan didn't get angry again. He spoke in a weak voice, his syllables trembling. What do you want to do? A mobile phone lit up in his direction. The familiar screen clearly indicated that it belonged to Jingchuan himself. Then there were familiar contacts, segments of invitations that had been edited but not yet sent out in his name. Each invitation was unique, almost precisely targeting the personality of each person on it. Even Jingchuan himself would doubt whether this familiar tone was content he edited in his dreams. I just want to invite everyone to gather. After all, we have been together for so long, and have formed deep friendships. Obviously, using Jingchuan's name, the call to action is stronger. A hateful smile spread out behind the phone. Every word the other party spit out sounded so gentle and harmless. So, please, Jingchuan, see for yourself. Are these reasons enough to move your dear classmates to accept the invitation? If not, please, Jingchuan, use your brain and think again. I think Jingchuan would be happy to help, right? Jingchuan couldn't help but fall silent. He knew very well what it meant to agree, but he was even clearer about the consequences of a direct refusal. The annoying narration sounded again. Jingchuan was caught in a fierce inner struggle. It's really hard to understand. Does he still need to struggle between sacrificing himself to save others and sacrificing others to save himself? Perhaps some people do have the character to sacrifice themselves to save others. But he obviously wasn't that kind of person. Perhaps he was still thinking about seeking help from others through implied language. No, if he had self-knowledge about his IQ, he shouldn't fantasize about such good things. After all, the evil villain just happened to know that he liked someone, happened to know that he would appear at the snack shop to buy soda at this time, happened to pick up the hairpin that someone cherished, happened to invite her to meet at this time, and then happened to be seen by our protagonist. It was just a casual attempt, and the protagonist was easily fooled. There was no need to try anything else. The protagonist's stupidity made the villain lose his sense of accomplishment. Hooking him was simpler than using dried fish to tease a cat. Even cats are wary of strangers now. Once he recognized this fact, our protagonist should know what choice he should make. Jingchuan's mentality collapsed again. I agree with you, that's it. Half an hour later, the first person named arrived, pushing open the door of the restroom of the long-abandoned old campus swimming pool. Jingchuan, what's the good news that you're in such a hurry to call me over? I had to climb out of my house window, if there's no surprise. A strong smell permeated the room. He didn't have time to say a few more words, and was knocked out on the spot. Then the next one, and the next, according to the distance of each person's journey and the timing of the notification, they arrived almost at equal intervals, and were captured one by one. Even if occasionally there was an unexpected fish that wasn't knocked out, it also fell under the unexpected brick. When they gradually woke up, they found that everyone was hanging upside down in a row at the top of the swimming pool, like a string of air-dried sausages. The one called Fang Yu forcefully occupied the C position. Everyone glared at Jingchuan. 1, 2, 3, 4, a total of 11. Just enough to form a football team. Bai Yi counted from left to right, slowly walked out with a loudspeaker, and everyone was shocked and widened their eyes. Shu Dongdong, it's you. It's me. Bai Yi nodded with a smile. To thank you all for the games you've brought me to experience over the past 2 years, I took the liberty of inviting everyone over in Jingchuan's name. I'm really sorry. I just suddenly found a more interesting and exciting new game, and couldn't wait to give back to everyone's deep affection. Everyone was both shocked and angry, but before they could say anything, Bai Yi had already waved his hand. Then, let's get started. Truth or dare, liars or rule breakers will be. Bang. The gear above suddenly turned, all the sausages, hanging in midair dropped rapidly, and their heads were buried in the pool one by one, not being pulled up again until a full 30 seconds later. Everyone experienced the feeling of suffocation that Jingchuan had experienced before, and Jingchuan was lucky enough to experience it for the second time. Be punished like this, Tilda. The cold pool water extinguished everyone's anger, making this group of people who should have been fierce and evil become obedient one by one. They became the best-behaved children who obeyed the rules. Bai Yi showed a satisfied smile. Then, he turned on the flashlight on his phone. A beam of light shone straight on the first person on the left, and the music for the character's entrance sounded timely. Then, the first one, Tilda. What's your darkest secret? Do you prefer to eat onions or cilantro? Have you ever killed anyone? Do you like to dress in women's clothing? What's your biggest weakness? Do you have any habits that are different from ordinary people? The light shone on each person one by one, and all kinds of strange questions came out of his mouth, even before people had time to react. Then, there were successive sounds of falling into the water. Bang, 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 liar, 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 until someone cried out in grievance. I didn't lie, everything I said was true. Bai Yi, I'm used to it. It was a slip of a hand. He still looked very polite. But the soaking wet people were already shivering. Every time they were thrown into the water and then pulled up, their height would drop a bit, which meant they were closer to the water surface. Now, the most dangerous person among them had been submerged by the water over his eyes, and he could only close his eyes tightly. If it continued, they dared not think any further and shivered deeply. In the short time before, wailing, cursing, begging, threatening, had all been proven useless. The Shu Dongdong in front of them was no longer the usual him, he was the incarnation of the devil. He played with their lives like a cat playing with a ball of yarn, without any psychological burden. There was another bang sound. I forgot to add, if you don't want to say your own, you can exchange it with someone else's secret. Similarly, if someone lies, and others choose to expose it, they can directly skip a round of the game and pass the question to the next person. Bai Yi, like every evil villain in the story, used a meaningful tone to bewitch everyone, making people who had no conscience in the first place teeter on the brink, and completely collapse. We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 15. N. Good friends should enhance their understanding of each other. Tilda. Thank you all for your cooperation. This game of truth or dare ended with Bai Yi's satisfied speech. He waved his hand at the row of air-dried sausages, hanging upside down in front of him with a bright smile. So, see you next time, Tilda. All the ropes fell instantly, and the uniform sound of falling into the water harvested the wailing and cursing, turning them into bubbles on the water surface. Gurgle, gurgle. Cough, cough. Bai Yi cleared his throat, lowering his voice. Souls filled with resentment and fear sank to the bottom of the water, spitting out malicious curses at the last moment of their lives. But they can rest assured, this is not the end. The real game has just begun. In order to let them die in peace, Bai Yi even used such a narration to hint at the truth that they could start over. In fact, this was not the first round. Apart from those games that could be cleared in one life, Bai Yi was not in a hurry to clear any game that could be saved and restarted. Years of falling into nightmares had given him a wealth of experience. He often used the first few rounds to collect all the necessary information, made adequate preparations, and then struck decisively, perfectly resolving everything. Therefore, in the real first round, Bai Yi was always observing. He collected information about everyone, even quietly followed Jingchuan and his group to figure out everyone's whereabouts, including how many minutes they stayed at each location at each time point. When he was ready to end the first round, thinking of the task of killing a person casually, he casually picked Jingchuan who had just arrived home. Using the phone he had smoothly obtained from the girl Jingchuan had a crush on, he easily lured him out. Then, he left him lying in the alley. Although there were many rough details in this, Bai Yi, who had no intention of achieving a high task completion degree in this round, just took a sheep on his way out. Who would have thought that the sheep would come running so willingly, smiley face? Everything was going too smoothly. Jingchuan's over-cooperation even left Bai Yi without a place to kill and bury the body, so he had to start a hasty interrogation in the alley. Then, after a series of ruthless operations, he pried a very suitable location from Jingchuan's mouth. The long-abandoned old campus swimming pool. Sure enough, didn't he personally experience the secret location recommended by the other party in this round? And he was the first one to experience it. Bai Yi felt that he was really a kind person. Leaving the swimming pool, Bai Yi was determined not to favor one and discriminate against the other. In addition to these 11 good friends who had already bonded with him, there were many classmates in the school who were only at the surface stage and needed to be understood more deeply. However, dealing with those people didn't need to be so troublesome. It could be done in a simpler and more brutal way. Locked in an empty laboratory, a beautiful girl facing a skeleton specimen shivered and cried out. Woo woo, I've already told you about the time when I was 8 years old and fell in love with a handsome little brother only to find out that he was actually a little sister. I've told you about not liking to brush my teeth at night, eating food, and liking to bite chopsticks. There's really nothing else to say. Woo woo woo, can I go now? Until she found that there was no sound outside the laboratory, the girl who tentatively ran over and easily opened the door had a stunned expression. Are today's suitors all so wild? They don't bother to observe a girl's preferences and directly interrogate the person involved? The bookworm straight student who was blocked on the way home from school faced the quality of the test paper that had been filled with words and was snatched away, showing a heartbroken expression, and surrendered before the other party's tearing ticket. Let's talk it out, don't resort to violence. The old-fashioned head teacher who always had sparse hair and cherished every strand of hair, found that he was tied up in the office by a mysterious person. His first reaction was to be furious and refuse to compromise. Until he saw the shiny scissors approaching his head, he screamed in horror. Don't come over. In the next few rounds, Bai Yi just slightly concealed his figure and face, so that people wouldn't recognize him at first sight, and got the information he wanted to know from each person in the most direct way. This method, which was too simple and brutal in reality and even full of loopholes, might not take long to be found by the parties and the police, but in a game that could be constantly saved and restarted, it was just the simplest and most efficient method. He was immersed in this pleasant new type of friend-making game, taking Shudong's class, sophomore year class 7, as the core, constantly radiating and spreading his circle of friends. Until this circle spread to the gatekeeper. Bai Yi walked out of the gatekeeper's room lightly, with a happy expression full of harvest, and as soon as he turned his head, he met a pair of round and pitch-black eyes. The cat squatting on the windowsill spread out its round belly, its eyes like glass beads curiously looking at the bipedal beast that suddenly came out, its long tail flicking up and down. Meow. Look what I found. Bai Yi stretched out his hand with lightning speed, instantly grabbing the back of the cat's neck, its destiny. He lowered his head in response to its fluffed-up fur, revealing an evil villainous smile, as if he would choose to kill the cat and silence it in the next moment. There's actually a cat that slipped through the net. Tilda. The cat was greatly startled. Meow. Bai Yi shook it. Yo, it's quite energetic. He began to ruthlessly interrogate the dizzy cat. Confess, your name, origin, what you heard hiding here, how many small dried fish will it take to bribe you? Achievement system has been refreshed. You have achieved the kill 11 people in half a day achievement. You have achieved the master of the melon field of Qingnan High School achievement. Note, from the 50-year-old gatekeeper to the 5-month-old kitten, you have interrogated them all. Cold-hearted, ruthless, you have become the man who holds the secrets of everyone in Qingnan High School. At the moment of choosing to save and exit, the stars scattered, the deep sea engulfed everything, and lines of text refreshed. A question mark popped up above Bai Yi's head. Quote ellipsis question mark quote. Forget it, won't bother with this silly system. Having played with the cat for half a day, Bai Yi, who almost broke the cat, was in a good mood at the moment and decided to be magnanimous for a while. Today there was wind outside, the sky was somewhat gloomy, it looked like it was going to rain. Bai Yi put on a coat and went downstairs to pick up the express delivery, and found that the vegetable and fruit shop not far away was open. However, probably due to the impact of the car accident, the business was far from as good as before, and at this time, there was no one. He carried the express delivery and strolled over, as usual, greeted the boss lady who was sitting in the shop in a daze, and asked, "What fresh vegetables do you have today?" The boss lady, who had been in a daze, came back to her senses and forced a smile. "Ah, it's Bai Yi. Today's bok choy is quite fresh, you see if you want to get some." "Then I'll take the bok choy." Bai Yi went with the flow, and casually picked a few other vegetables. When paying the bill, probably because Bai Yi's attitude was still the same as before, unlike some people who always looked at her and whispered, or tried to ask about her husband's situation in a roundabout way, the boss lady's smile became much more genuine. She casually chatted with Bai Yi. "By the way, how come I haven't seen you go out for several days?" "I've been too lazy to go out recently, just staying at home playing games." Bai Yi raised his eyebrows, answering with a chuckle. "What game is so attractive? You young people still need to take care of your health. It's a game with multiple saves, looks like it can be played for quite a few days. The NPCs are all interesting, I really like it, it's even more fun when eliminating them tilde." Oh, I get it, I've heard of it, is it called something like Eliminate, Happy Elimination, right?" The boss lady suddenly realized, and mumbled doubtfully, "But does that game have those NPCs?" Bai Yi, holding the express delivery in one hand and taking the vegetables with the other, didn't forget to nod. Yes, it's happy elimination. The elimination process is full of variety, so happy, so joyful." He went upstairs with his bags and parcels, reopened the nightmare game, and entered the so-called happy elimination. The moment he woke up, the familiar narration slowly appeared, just like every other time. But this time, the content of the narration changed. "You were born a devil. Under your seemingly ordinary appearance, hides a restless, uneasy heart that disregards all laws and regulations. You suppress it, trying to make yourself fit in. Rather than being insulted and ridiculed by others, being treated as a joke, a piece of trash, becoming a little bit of fun in their boring lives, you would rather put on human skin and stand among the crowd of ordinary people. But you know, you're not like them. You endure the pain, until the beast bursts out of your chest. It's time to make a change. Task 1. Kill a person at will, prove your courage. Task 2. Complete a wonderful murder, prove your wisdom. Task 3. Manipulate others to complete an unexpected murder, break away from the crowd of ordinary people, and prove to the world, you are in existence far superior to them. We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 16. Miss Tian Yin, on the morning of June 13th, did you go to Li's vegetable and fruit shop with the deceased, Ji Yu Fengyu? June 13th? I remember now, that day was a Saturday, just when we returned to the old city. Every weekend, my father would take me back to visit my grandparents, and we bought some fruit on the way at the vegetable and fruit shop. Do you remember what happened then? Ah, I don't quite remember. What do you mean? Do you remember 20,170,309 Shihei? What is that? According to the suspect Lu Quan, who is also the owner of Li's vegetable and fruit shop, Mr. Zhang, Ji Yu Fengyu was holding the fruit and it was inconvenient for him, so you used his phone to scan the code to pay. As a result, you accidentally entered the memo interface. This is the content of the first memo. At that time, Lu Quan was next to you, and from his perspective, he could just see the beginning of this memo. The bewildered young girl finally showed a look of sudden realization, recalling and saying, "Oh, it's that matter. I remember now, when I was checking out, I think I did accidentally enter the memo, and when I exited, I was in such a hurry that I almost dropped the phone on the ground. Fortunately, it seemed that my father didn't notice." The girl showed a slowly recalling expression. She asked again, "Does this matter have anything to do with my father's car accident?" It does have some relevance. It can only be said that Lu Quan is really meticulous and ruthless. March 9, 2017, Shihei County. This is the time and place where Lu Quan committed the crime that year. He has a deep impression. He has never forgotten it in these 7 years of fleeing. So, when he unintentionally saw the beginning of this memo, he was alert at the first moment. Then, under his careful observation, he found that Ji Yu Fengyu had been quietly observing his every move in the shop, as if confirming something. His eyes were full of scrutiny and suspicion. He found that Ji Yu Fengyu didn't even carefully select the fruits in the bag. There were obviously a few that looked small and sour. Obviously, buying fruit was just a cover. At this point, the police paused. For several days afterwards, he noticed that Ji Yu Fengyu, who should have been at school, had actually stayed in the old city with his parents and was often observing him in secret. Whether it was having breakfast at different tables in the breakfast shop, meeting on the road, or Ji Yu Fengyu going to the vegetable shop to buy vegetables, as long as he paid careful attention, he would find that teacher Ji Yu, who should have nothing to do with him, always couldn't help but look at him with unfriendly eyes, as if looking at a hidden criminal. This feeling made Lu Quan extremely uncomfortable. These were all confessed by Lu Quan afterwards. According to his recollection, there were many such details. At this point, the police officer took a sip from his water cup. With the accumulation of details, Lu Quan, relying on his anti-detection consciousness, determined that Ji Yu Fengyu might have dug up the case from somewhere and suspected that he was the fugitive, but he was not completely sure, so he was observing him in secret. This made Lu Quan murderous. Time was pressing, so before Ji Yu Fengyu could confirm his identity and report to the police station, he took the initiative. So that's how it was. Tian Yin murmured, showing an incredulous expression. In the eyes of the experienced police officer, her shock and realization at this time were definitely not pretense. Through the comparison of the testimonies of both parties, it was proven that Lu Quan did not lie, and the police completely restored the course of the whole incident. Ji Yu Fengyu discovered Lu Quan's identity for unknown reasons and observed and investigated in secret. Unexpectedly, the memo on his phone accidentally exposed his thoughts, which made Lu Quan on guard and instead took the initiative to kill and silence him. When Tian Yin walked out of the police station, it was already dusk. She stood quietly in place, looking up at the sky. In the gloomy sky hung a ray of rosy clouds. Half of the sky was sinking into darkness, and half of the sky was illuminated by the rosy clouds. "Miss Tian Yin, please wait." A voice came from behind. Someone caught up with her. Tian Yin turned around and recognized the person. "Officer Li, do you have anything else?" Li Fufeng looked at her with a complicated gaze, but spoke frankly. "I just have some doubts about the case. After all, this case is too coincidental." He casually enumerated. Ji Yu Fengyu obviously already suspected Lu Quan's identity and should have been more cautious about him, but the memo on his phone was not kept confidential, and it happened to be seen by Lu Quan, and the content on it happened to be the most likely to alert Lu Quan. But Ji Yu Fengyu himself did not know that he had been exposed and was killed by Lu Quan without being vigilant. Everything is as coincidental as a carefully woven story, which is unbelievable. Tian Yin frowned. "So, what are you implying?" "I just suddenly had a bold guess. If Ji Yu Fengyu never suspected Lu Quan's identity from beginning to end, he naturally wouldn't be on guard against him. And there is a person who neither of them would suspect." She could easily add to Ji Yu Fengyu's phone memo. Ji Yu Fengyu trusts her enough. She could influence Ji Yu Fengyu's thoughts, speak ill of Lu Quan in front of Ji Yu Fengyu, making Ji Yu Fengyu look at him with the eyes of scrutinizing a bad person. She could also let Lu Quan discover the addition to the memo at this time, which could easily cause misunderstandings between the two. All of this is simple for her. Li Fufeng word by word, his gaze tightly on Tian Yin, scrutinizing her every expression. Tian Yin exclaimed, "I didn't expect Officer Li to have such a wild guess. It does make some sense." For example, if I were to tell my father that Boss John harbors ill intentions towards me and has been harassing me, and then convince my father that if he doesn't believe it, he can observe carefully for a while, my father would definitely believe me, observe in secret, and might even want to quietly find the other party's handle to deal with him. Right, I could also easily add content to my father's phone memo, and then deliberately show it to Lu Quan. Thinking about it this way, it really is easy to cause misunderstandings, making him think that my father is doubting his real identity. Of course, all of this is impossible. She sighed and shook her head. Who could have thought that Boss John would turn out to be a fugitive? It's even less likely to think that an ordinary memo would have such important significance. If I had known all this earlier, maybe my father wouldn't have. At this point, Tian Yin looked gloomy. You indeed didn't know, but what if the person behind the scenes who was guiding everything knew? He knows Lu Quan's identity, knows Lu Quan's character, and knows more clearly that once that memo is shown in front of him, it will arouse Lu Quan's vigilance and suspicion. Knowing that Ji Yufengyu only dares to observe in secret, looking for Lu Quan's handle, not daring to confront him face to face, he knows how to guide everything step by step towards the direction he wants. Huh? Tian Yin opened her mouth in surprise, looking at the serious Li Fufeng, as if she had heard some absurd joke that she couldn't understand. I thought we were just making a few casual assumptions. Officer Li, you wouldn't really suspect that I did something based on groundless guesses, would you? The story you told me sounds like a detective novel. Even the big villain who manipulates everything behind the scenes has come out. She shook her head with a smile, looking helpless. Yes, without any basis. Li Fufeng nodded. You can just think of me as talking nonsense, diverging thinking. Tian Yin smiled without changing her expression, showing the maturity beyond her age. No, this is Officer Li's dutiful performance. You've also worked hard for this case. She looked at the sky, but it's not early anymore. If I stay any longer, my grandparents at home will worry. I should go back. She nodded to Li Fufeng, turned around and left. Suddenly, Li Fufeng's voice came from behind. On June 20th, 3 days after the car accident, you transferred 5,000 yuan to an unknown account registered overseas. You respectfully call that person, Doctor. We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 17. Tian Yin's steps paused for a moment. She suddenly turned her head, her eyebrows furrowed. What? Li Fufeng, as if completely unable to read the room, still spoke frankly. Sorry, I'm a bit curious and always like to explore. If I have offended. If you know it's offensive, then stop. This slender girl, who always gave a sense of softness, showed such firmness for the first time. Her words were sharp as a knife. I'm not a suspect. Even if you, Officer Li, have a special status, you don't have the right to pry into my privacy, do you? Li Fufeng was not angry at all, but rather murmured thoughtfully. It seems that this doctor really holds a special place in your heart. Tian Yin fell silent. She clenched her fists bit by bit. Fine, since you insist on knowing, I'll tell you. Tian Yin began to speak word by word. I don't know what the doctor's identity is in reality. I only know that he is a good doctor. At least, he saved me. Li Fufeng assumed a listening posture. A struggle appeared on Tian Yin's face, and she was silent for a while before she began. I'm not my parents' biological daughter. 3 years ago, I was just an orphan who had just entered high school and lost her biological parents. Because I had no other relatives, my homeroom teacher, Teacher Ji Yu, and his family adopted me. My new parents were very good to me. But since my mother fell ill and died 9 months ago, my father started to act strangely. He began to care about me very, very much. At first, he strictly controlled my time. Every day I was either at school or at home. I couldn't go anywhere. He didn't allow me to interact with strangers outside, telling me that bad people outside would try to kidnap me. Then it was talking to male classmates at school. If my father saw it, he would scold me severely when I got home, forbidding me to date early. Even if I explained, it was useless. Later, going home on weekends to see my grandparents was the most relaxing time for me. At other times, every move I made was under my father's watchful eye. He was like a shadow. I couldn't establish even a temporary relationship with anyone. One day, after I finished taking a bath and came out of the bathroom, I found my father standing by the bed, staring at the bathroom door. His eyes were terrifying. I was scared. I felt like I was suffocating. But this was not the most terrifying part. One day not long after, my father suddenly moved his luggage into my room. He said he wanted to watch me all the time, and I could never, never, never escape from him. As she narrated, Tian Yin's tone became elusive. Her gaze also became unfocused. So day by day, I felt sick, very sick. I didn't know if it was my father who was crazy or me. The world in my eyes became very strange. I suddenly felt that everything in front of me was false, just a dream. If I died in the dream, I could wake up, right? The girl's voice was barely audible. Just when I was preparing to do so, the doctor found me. He said he was a psychologist who hadn't received a certificate, and was accumulating relevant experience for himself. He saw my distress on an anonymous forum. He was willing to help me, as a way to accumulate new cases. I don't know why, but I believe him. Those words that I couldn't tell anyone in reality, I told him all at once. In retrospect, I was like a babbling madman at the time, full of disjointed nonsense. The doctor was really amazing. During his treatment, I felt myself getting better. This false, distorted world began to recover bit by bit. A smile reappeared on Tian Yin's face. Her tone was full of heartfelt gratitude, and there was an imperceptible fanaticism in her eyes. It was then that I realized, both my father and I were sick. We both needed treatment. I recommended my father to the doctor, hoping that everything could return to the way it was at the beginning. Hearing this, Li Fufeng, who had been silent all along, finally spoke. So, did the doctor guide you on how to deal with him? No, why would you think that? Tian Yin's tone was surprised. She seemed to have completely detached from the dark memories, and regained her firm and cold tone. I admit you are very good at expanding your thinking, but it's better to say less without basis. The doctor is a good person who understands others. My father's car accident was really too unexpected for me. I had already introduced him to the doctor, wanting to cure him. Who could have thought, a wanted murderer was hiding among us all along, and just like that, took his life. The girl's face was expressionless. She sighed disinterestedly. Perhaps she already knew, even without evidence, the person across from her had guessed the truth, so she didn't bother to pretend anymore. Everything ended just like that. About that 5,000 yuan. That 5,000 yuan was a symbolic consultation fee charged by the doctor, although I think it's far from enough. I will always be grateful to him. Li Fufeng fell silent. Tian Yin's words were almost watertight, or rather, even if there were loopholes, they couldn't touch her. After all, in this case, she was just a character who opened the memo in front of the murderer, unintentionally provoking him. Perhaps she had played another role in front of Ji Yufengyu, guiding his actions. But apart from Ji Yufengyu himself, who had died, no one would reveal the answer. What bad intentions could such a little girl have? Did she instigate the murderer to kill? Officer Li, do you still have any further doubts? If not, then I'll leave first. After all, my grandparents have been waiting at home for so long, they must be anxious. When Li Fufeng came back to his senses from his contemplation, he saw that Tian Yin had returned to her previous state, as if the tense atmosphere of confrontation just now didn't exist. Before leaving, she didn't forget to add with a smile, also, regarding your unauthorized investigation into my privacy, I may complain to the police station later, I hope you understand. Watching the girl's retreating figure, Li Fufeng stood in place and suddenly spoke. Do you think what she said is all true? 70% true, 30% false, I guess. Lu Ningxuang, who had appeared at some point, continued the conversation. Li Fufeng nodded. Of course, she doesn't trust us. Or rather, she doesn't trust anyone other than the doctor. Of course, she wouldn't lay everything out. For example, did she really think that Ji Yufengyu was sick? And the doctor's treatment method, I'm also curious. When he mentioned the name Ji Yufengyu, a strange emotion flashed in Li Fufeng's eyes. But the person was already dead. The one who would suffer the most would only be the living. After a long time, he just slowly exhaled, but really amazing. Yeah, she's not even 18 yet, and she has such a strong psychological quality, able to control her emotions so perfectly. Some of her emotions just now were deliberately shown, except when it comes to the doctor, it's from the heart. Lu Ningxuang sighed, her tone complex. Such a girl, indeed amazing. I'm talking about the person behind her, that doctor. Li Fufeng shook his head. Borrowing a knife to kill, and can perfectly remove himself, as if invisible. Even if all the truth is revealed, she won't have any charges on her, really amazing. Yeah, even if it can be checked, to verify your guess, but the one who chose to kill was Lu Quan himself, no one instigated him. Lu Ningxuang also sighed in admiration from the bottom of her heart. But compared to her companion's excessive sense of justice and curiosity that sought to get to the bottom of things, Lu Ningxuang was more emotional. She looked in the direction the girl had left, her gaze somewhat pitiful. Since the final result is no different, why go to great lengths to uncover all the secrets? Perhaps, the truth will only hurt everyone. Whether it was Tian Yin, or the two old people. Perhaps, Li Fufeng had a different idea, but no matter how hurtful the truth is, it's still the truth. His tone was very firm, and what I care about is not Tian Yin, but that doctor. By controlling others' personalities and weaknesses, enticing others to act according to his own ideas, like manipulating puppets. And he himself stays behind the scenes, achieving all his goals. Such a person, if left unchecked, is really too dangerous. Look, once someone discovers your weakness, this is the outcome of being at their mercy. As soon as he entered the game, Bai Yi found the cat that he had messed with in the previous round. The cat was now spirited and had completely forgotten its previous painful experience. He stroked the cat while giving it a lesson, his smile very bright. As a cat that can be easily lured out by a few small fish, you should reflect on yourself. As he spoke, he lifted the cat's two paws with both hands, staring seriously at those round eyes. Meow, the cat made a soft, powerless sound. Do you understand? The hateful bipedal beast didn't let the cat go. Meow, super fierce.jpg. After giving the kitten a theory lesson, regardless of whether it understood or not, Bai Yi began to prepare for practice. His gaze swept over the taskbar floating in front of him. Task 1, kill someone at will, prove your courage. Task 2, complete a wonderful murder, prove your wisdom. Task 3, manipulate others to complete an unexpected murder, break away from the crowd of ordinary people, and prove to the world you are in existence far above them. The tasks have actually changed. This is really the first time for such a thing. We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hgavu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 18. Weiwu. The alarm in Qingnan High School was blaring non-stop. This was already the third time this week. If the first time filled everyone with curiosity and a desire to investigate, the second time they were still surprised. By the third time, all that was left in people's reactions was numbness. Beyond numbness, there was a deep-seated fear. In the school that was supposed to educate people, 3 murders had occurred in just 1 week. One of them was a conflict that erupted without any warning. By the time others reacted, a person had already fallen in a pool of blood. Another was a secretive murder that took place off campus. If it weren't for someone who happened to discover the body, the murderer might still be attending classes in the school as if nothing had happened, and the deceased, due to his past record of truancy, would only be thought to have skipped class and disappeared again. Now, another murder had happened without any warning. The teachers and students of Qingnan High School were deeply puzzled by this. Although none of the guys who died were worth sympathizing with among their classmates, either they were the ones who had been humiliated and oppressed by them, or they were accomplices who had colluded with them. No one would genuinely feel sad for them. Perhaps some even felt a heartfelt delight. But the frequent occurrence of murders still made people feel sorrowful. It was as if an invisible ghost was hovering over the campus, leading these people to a dead end. It spread fear wantonly, causing everyone to feel insecure. At this time, no one had the mind to care about the transparent person who had always been treated as a joke and a toy, even those who were very keen on using him for leisure and entertainment on ordinary days. Bai Yi, holding the fat cat, was moving through the panicked campus. He was like a ghost invisible among the crowd. The intense spiritual fluctuations from all directions surged towards him, and endless panic wove into a vortex that pulled at him. He silently looked at these faces, each like a pallet. Even though the school had already strengthened its measures, and teachers repeatedly soothed everyone's emotions, the most hot-tempered guys on ordinary days began to learn restraint, yet bizarre incidents were still happening. The person manipulating all of this behind the scenes was not surprised. In this world, even the most honest and timid guys have a day when they wield a butcher's knife. Biological fathers and sons can turn against each other. Loving couples can kill each other. It all depends on whether there is a motive that makes you determined to risk everything. And just so, he could give everyone a motive. He knew everyone's important or unimportant secrets, and had control over everyone's biggest weakness. Over the course of half a month, Qingnan High School had frequent murders. No matter how they investigated, it was all coincidental. All the murderers calmly admitted that their actions were from their hearts. There was no one behind the scenes directing them, because the deceased had touched their untouchable scales. For a time, Qingnan High School had almost become the location for countless horror novels. Some people even thought that there was some terrible curse here. One could imagine that perhaps many years later, many people would still have the 7 legends of the campus related to it. Under the tremendous pressure of public opinion, the school had no choice but to announce a temporary holiday and let the students go home. Bai Yi was slowly mingling in the crowd leaving the school. Suddenly he slightly turned his head and looked at a big tree next to the school gate. A cat as fat as a black dumpling was lying on the tree. Its round eyes met the young man's gaze. Yo, Bai Yi waved at it in greeting. Meow tilde, the cat responded to him. So, see you in the next loop tilde. At the end of this loop, Bai Yi decided to start a new save. Even though he could submit the results of this loop directly, he was 100% sure he could successfully clear the game and get a high evaluation. But Bai Yi suddenly realized that he seemed to be acting foolishly. Tailoring a script for each person based on their weaknesses, making everyone obey his will and let him manipulate them, indeed could hide himself very well, but the efficiency was too low. After all, the design of each script required time and effort, which made the game time long and boring. He suddenly realized that he didn't have to be so cautious, pursuing a flawless script. The difference between games and reality is that he doesn't have to be careful every step of the way, avoiding any mistakes. Because it doesn't matter if there are loopholes, having fun is the most important. At the start of the new loop, Bai Yi decided to change his approach. Once again waking up in the bathroom, he was not in a hurry at all, leisurely washing his hands and face, making himself clean. The moment he pushed the door and came out, Bai Yi snapped his fingers. I decided, this is the last loop. With only an hour and a half left before school was out in the afternoon, in the middle of class, the young man with water stains on his clothes hurried back to the classroom of sophomore year class 7. No one expressed anything about this. Jingchuan, who was originally bored and hiding in the back playing with his phone, noticed this scene, and a smile spread across his face. Just as the young man was passing by him, he stretched out a leg and blocked the other's path. If it were in the past, this guy would most likely have been tripped. But today, this waste managed to dodge it agilely. This made Jingchuan feel a bit upset, and he glared at the other fiercely. Due to the ongoing class, he didn't do anything. Darn it, at that moment, the game ended, and Jingchuan lost. He furiously tapped on his phone, spewing a string of trash talk at his opponent before angrily quitting the game. The failure in the game left Jingchuan with a belly full of anger, and he wanted to find some fun elsewhere. As soon as the bell rang for the end of class, he turned around, casting a malicious gaze towards the last row of the classroom, at the guy who was sitting with his head down, not knowing what he was doing. He was just about to get up when his phone suddenly vibrated silently. Jing Chuan took out his phone, only to find a message from a stranger on the screen. At the same time, the other students all did the same thing as him, which was to look down and check their phones. In this school where discipline was not strict, bringing a phone to school was the norm for everyone. The same content appeared on everyone's screens. Do you want to get to know the real you? Which guy is messing around? Boring. Upon seeing this nonsensical content, Jing Chuan frowned. He was about to delete it when his phone started vibrating again. Let's play a game. I know the secrets of each and every one of you. To prove that I'm not lying, each of you will receive 2 messages. The first one is your biggest secret, and the second one is the biggest secret of another person. I will randomly choose one person from among the others besides you. Conversely, your secret may also appear in someone else's phone in this way. The content of these messages left everyone stunned. The classroom suddenly became noisy. I seem to have received a prank text message. Which guy is causing trouble? I got the same thing here. Are you kidding me? I don't believe him. Amid the discussions and laughter of the crowd, the phone vibrated again. Jing Chuan, with a mindset of just playing around, clicked to open it. The next moment, he subconsciously clenched his phone, blocking the screen. Your little angel-like sister, your whole family has been heartbroken over her accidental disappearance when she was 6 years old, and your family has been immersed in the shadow. But it wasn't an accidental disappearance. It was intentional. You were jealous of her. You wanted her to disappear. Who the hell is it? Jing Chuan's face changed dramatically. His voice trembled with anger and fear, but he held his phone tightly, looking around like a thief. As if trying to find the person hiding in the crowd, and as if afraid that his secret had already been exposed to the world. And it was at this time that he realized that at least half of the people in the class had the same reaction as him, and although the reactions of the others were not as intense, they were not looking too good either. Before he could think more, another message followed closely. Randomly selected, Feng Suo. His secret is, at the age of 15, he went swimming with his best friend. During an argument, he pushed his best friend into the river and drowned him. But afterwards, as the only witness, he claimed that it was an accident caused by a slip of the foot, thus escaping punishment, and no one knew. This. Jing Chuan, who was originally both shocked and angry, suddenly widened his eyes, his face showing extreme shock. This was actually Boss Feng's secret? That leader who always acted arrogantly and domineeringly in front of them, actually had such a deadly handle. Now, the handle had fallen into his hands. Jing Chuan subconsciously looked in the direction of Boss Feng. He saw the other party's fierce gaze sweeping around, scanning each person with eyes full of threat and suspicion. The person he is looking for is me. Jing Chuan's heart pounded, and he quickly lowered his head. But he couldn't help but think about whether he could use this secret to do something. Especially when he thought about how he had always been submissive in front of Boss Feng in the past, like a lackey, but now, he had grasped the other's fatal weakness. A strange sense of excitement spread in his heart. But when he lowered his head and saw the secret about himself, it was like a bucket of cold water poured on his head, making him shiver. I'm thinking this way now, won't there be other people thinking about how to deal with me? Damn it, damn it. Damn bastard, don't let me know who's messing around. He cursed the puppeteer behind the scenes. At this moment, Jing Chuan was just an insignificant member of the entire classroom. Most of the others had the same reaction as him. Only a few people who hadn't done anything guilty remained calm. Their secrets being exposed was just a matter of embarrassment. So they were still able to deal with the secrets about others on their phones with the mentality of bystanders. But these people were ultimately a minority. The bell rang for class, and self-study began, but everyone was in no mood to study, their faces stiff and strange. Some people started laughing. What era is this, and people are still playing this kind of prank? No way, no one would really believe it, right? Whoever believes it is a fool. This joker is really boring. While saying they didn't believe it, almost everyone subconsciously clenched their phones, quietly casting their eyes on the other people in the classroom, and the atmosphere unconsciously became strange. The panic of worrying about their own secrets being leaked, and the excitement of having a handle on another person, clashed in their hearts, and everyone's gaze towards others became flickering. The phone started vibrating again. This time, everyone opened it at the first moment. Now, you who have grasped another person's biggest secret, and your own secret is also held by someone you don't know, what kind of performance will you have? Is it to act as if nothing has happened, choose to maintain good character by keeping silent, or to use it without changing your expression? Do you trust yourself, and do you trust others? Everyone's faces turned very ugly. And the person behind the scenes didn't let them go at all. People will never get to know their true selves, until a special moment finally arrives. It's time to open your chest and face yourself, smiley face. The smile at the end of the text message was like a clown's funny face, mocking each and every one of them. Knowing that the guy behind the scenes meant no good, but having to fall into his trap. This feeling was really terrible to the extreme. Bai Yi sat in the last row, watching everyone's reactions with interest. The surging and chaotic spiritual fluctuations around him undoubtedly indicated that these people were anything but calm inside. He casually stuffed the phone he had picked up from a student wandering outside on his way back to the classroom into his pocket, looking forward to it. The beginning had already been written, and the rest of the script depended on how these characters were prepared to improvise. The unknown always fills people with interest. We are currently recruiting CNKR JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 19. The performance of the NPCs in the game did not surprise Bai Yi. Just by the impure aura emanating from their souls, Bai Yi did not believe they could love each other unconditionally. He chose to submit the task and end this instance. The system, which had been playing dead most of the time, appeared again. Lines of twisted, blurry text flickered before Bai Yi's eyes. Successfully cleared the nightmare fragment, Lamb's counterattack. Instance level. Clearance evaluation, S. Points earned, 5. Unlocked achievements. Killed 11 people in half a day, master of the melon field in Qingnan High School, explanation omitted. Open hidden instance, Demon's Game. Instance level. Clearance evaluation, S. Points earned, 20. Unlocked achievements, Heart of the Demon. Explanation. You completed the basic task with a completion degree of 300%, and on this basis, you elevated the task several levels. The weak and powerless lamb was twisted into a man-eating demon by your outstanding performance. Want to play a game? Explanation. You toyed with everyone in a way that could be described as ruthless, becoming everyone's nightmare. 7 mysterious legends of the campus. Explanation. Because of your existence, Qingnan High School became the prototype of a horror novel. 7 mysterious legends were born here and will be permanently circulated in the nightmare fragment instances. The ghosts who died tragically curse day and night with resentment, but they don't even know who the real culprit is. Start special reward extraction. You received a special drop, Nightmare Crystal, white times 10. You received a special growth card. Explanation. Since this card has not yet reached its peak, it can continue to grow, and the current star level characteristics are unknown. Do you choose to keep this nightmare fragment instance and cultivate this special growth card in the instance? The system will open a new hang-up mode for players to accelerate time within the instance. Bai Yi, who was originally lacking in interest, brightened up. Idle mode, it seems that you, the system, have finally learned to keep up with the times. He decisively chose to keep the instance. Regarding the inability to idle, Bai Yi had never stopped complaining. In every interval of the game, his 2 opposing principles technique output was enough to make anyone want to kill him on the spot. Fortunately, the system was not a person. For general mobile games or PC games, he only needed to sit in front of the screen controlling the NPCs. Perhaps 5 minutes had passed in reality, but 5 days had already passed in the game time. During this time, he could idle and daydream. But the nightmare game was not so friendly in this regard. Although there was a huge difference in the speed of time between reality and the nightmare, every minute and second in the nightmare was truly experienced by Bai Yi himself, which meant that he could only carry out tasks that were relatively short in duration. If a certain instance required 3 years to clear, he would really have to spend 3 years in the nightmare instance as a character. This kind of patience, he had always lacked. Under Bai Yi's expectant gaze, the system hesitated for a moment. Idle mode is about to start. Under idle mode, time accelerates within the nightmare fragment instance. The game character will continue to grow according to the traits assigned by the player, and the system will deduce his fate line for a period of time in the future until he reasonably reaches the peak. The main traits currently assigned by the player to the game character, Shudong, are cunning, cold, insight, manipulation, control, desire, disguise. Combining the worldview within the nightmare fragment instance, the system will deduce the character's fate line accordingly. Do you want to start idle mode? Bai Yi chose without hesitation, of course. The next moment, he only felt his soul lightly floating up into the sky, looking down at everything below from a bird's eye view. First was Qingnan High School, then the nearby streets and communities, and finally an aerial view of an entire city appeared in Bai Yi's line of sight, with a large blank area on the edge of the city. The whole world was like a jigsaw puzzle that had been shattered and reassembled, undergoing dizzying changes. Under the acceleration of time, all things were like the scenery flying by outside the car window, leaving only a blurry impression on his retina. Feeling bored, Bai Yi temporarily exited the game. He surfaced from the deep sea adorned with large pieces of star fragments, and the first thing he saw was the gradually sinking night outside the window. The blackness, like ink, dyed his pupils. Gurgle. Because he had been immersed in the final week of the game and missed dinner, his stomach protested. Bai Yi reached out and touched his shriveled stomach, lying on the bed not wanting to move. He tried to persuade his stomach. Be quiet, you can do it, be strong for a while. Gurgle gurgle. The response from his stomach was very disrespectful to him. Bai Yi rolled around on the bed, from left to right, and finally got up reluctantly. All right, I really can't handle you. Even though I'm not hungry yet, who made you hungry? The wall clock was already pointing to 7:30 in the evening, and Bai Yi slowly walked towards the kitchen to start washing the vegetables. Fortunately, before he started the final week, he had already bought all the vegetables for dinner, otherwise, at this point in time, he might not be able to buy any fresh ingredients. The kitchen knife seemed to have a life of its own, almost dancing out after images on the chopping board. This knife skill was enough to make any onlooker doubtless that the person with such knife skill must be a rare great chef before they tasted the food he cooked. Today, the sparrows outside the window were smart and stayed away from Bai Yi's kitchen early. The heavy clouds gathered. The sky was gloomy all day. When Bai Yi was immersed in the final week of the game, he just missed the brief glow of the sunset, and then the sky returned to its dark tone. When he went downstairs to throw out the trash, many residents were walking outside. Seeing Bai Yi, they all greeted him. For this young man who had moved to the old city area for more than half a year, everyone considered themselves to be quite familiar with him. Although he hardly went out unless it was necessary to buy vegetables, and seemed a bit reclusive and strange, hard to approach. But once they communicated with him, everyone couldn't help but like his quiet and easygoing, good at listening personality. He was friendly to everyone, could take a joke, and never got angry about anything. The older people liked such a good boy. So, everyone was keen to chat with this young man who was good at listening, and they were also willing to share gossip with him who rarely went out, so that he would not be left behind because of the lagging news. Just as he went downstairs, someone started a conversation with him. It's been more than half a month since I last saw you, Bai Yi. You look even whiter. I'm really envious. The girl who was speaking was tall and wore casual summer clothes. Her hair was tied into a ponytail and peeked out from under a baseball cap. The ends of her hair curled up on her shoulders, giving off a different kind of vitality. This was a resident living downstairs from Bai Yi, named Xia Jiajia, a warm and straightforward college student who spent most of her time living in school, allowing Bai Yi to enjoy the quiet. Just for this reason, Bai Yi was very satisfied with her. Xia Jiajia was still looking at the young man in front of her, praising him with a sound of admiration that only girls could understand. This time, she had a rare vacation to come home, and also happened to bump into Bai Yi going out. She immediately enthusiastically cut the fresh watermelon in front of her into several slices and handed one to Bai Yi. Here, have a slice of watermelon. It's just bought, big and sweet. And, it's really sweet, Tilda. Bai Yi thanked her, took a bite of the watermelon she handed him, and then made a fair evaluation. You must have heard about Teacher Gu's incident, right? I didn't expect such a big thing to happen in the old city area while I was at school for more than half a month. This watermelon is delicious, eat more. Xia Jiajia gossiped while eating watermelon, looking at the face in front of her that exceeded the standard of beauty. The watermelon in her hand tasted even sweeter. After all, who isn't a beauty dog? She casually handed Bai Yi another slice of watermelon. Bai Yi touched his stomach, chose to refuse, and naturally took over her topic. Looking at your reaction, is the car accident not over yet? You guessed it, Xia Jiajia gave a thumbs up. I just got some fresh gossip. It seems that not long after Tian Yin went to the police station to testify, the Jiyu family made a fuss again. Just 10 minutes ago, Mrs. Jiyu had a heart attack and was sent to the hospital, and it seems that Mr. Jiyu is not in a good condition either. She shook her head in confusion. What does Teacher Gu's incident have to do with Tian Yin? I really didn't expect that Mrs. Jiyu and the others are such people. Do they really think that Tian Yin killed Teacher Jiyu? I didn't see them being so superstitious before. Because of this reason, she, who should have sympathized with Teacher Gu's car accident, felt that she couldn't sympathize. Bai Yi was playing the role of a melon-eating crowd on the side. He knew that even if he didn't speak, Xia Jiajia would be very interested in continuing. Sure enough, after criticizing Mrs. Jiyu and the others a few times, Xia Jiajia brought the topic to Bai Yi. If I remember correctly, your initial target for renting a house should be next to the Jiyu family, right? That room is almost the best environment in the old city area. If I wasn't short of money, I would have chosen there. Weren't you very satisfied at the time? Why did you back out later? Because I originally thought there were only 2 old people there, but every weekend the biggest source of garbage pollution would appear. Xia Jiajia was stunned, even her accent came out. What do you mean? Don't you know, Teacher Jiyu has body odor, and every weekend when he passes by my house, I get smoked. Bai Yi said in a serious tone. It was such an absurd thing, but his tone and demeanor were so serious that Xia Jiajia really believed his nonsense. She immediately gasped, showing an incredulous expression, her eyes full of disgust. No way, he's really that. Suddenly, she didn't want to eat the watermelon in her hand anymore. Of course, I'm joking. You didn't really believe me, did you? Bai Yi, however, retracted his words, a smile appearing on his face, with a lively spirit of a child who had successfully played a prank. Xia Jiajia was startled, quickly eating the watermelon to calm herself down, and couldn't help but complain, you said it so seriously, who wouldn't believe it? But, I don't really like Teacher Jiyu either, I always feel that his temperament is a bit gloomy. As the two were talking, there was a sudden chill above their heads. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops, the raindrops fell. Bai Yi stretched out his hand to catch the raindrops. It's raining. It's raining. Xia Jiajia exclaimed, hastily packing up her things. Bai Yi, who had come back to his senses, helped her move the tables, chairs, and benches that she had placed outside into the house. Then, he declined Xia Jiajia's enthusiastic invitation and turned to leave. The illusory card flickered at his fingertips. Looking at the slender figure of the young man in the rain curtain, Xia Jiajia inexplicably felt a strange feeling rise up, and couldn't help but shake her head. Why'd I always have a premonition that something big is about to happen? Is it because this scene is so beautiful, just like the prelude to a blockbuster movie where the curtain is about to be lifted? We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 20. The idle mode had been turned off. The time in the Nightmare Fragment instance had accelerated to 10 years later, and the character had grown to the peak state within this instance. Bai Yi slowly opened his eyes, accompanied by the system's narration, as he passed through the deep sea filled with large fragments of stars. A wind blew from afar, causing his collar to rustle. He was standing at an unprecedented height. With a slight downward shift of his gaze, he could see the continuous city buildings under his feet. The rich night enveloped the city, and the flickering neon lights drew a series of crisscrossing rainbows on the pitch-black night sky, like a child's crayon drawing. Bai Yi stood on the rooftop. Behind him, the unsealed door faintly transmitted the elegant piano music and speeches. Whether from the luxurious scale of this building or from the words floating out from behind the door, it was undoubtedly a grand and extraordinary party taking place here. Yet, he stood alone on the rooftop, enjoying the breeze, standing at the highest point of the city, appreciating the scenery under his feet. This inevitably reminded Bai Yi of the first time he entered this game, the embarrassment that this character had shown. It was a startling contrast. Bai Yi sighed immediately. Dong. I didn't expect that after 10 years, you have changed from a double dong to a single dong. The aura is different all of a sudden. Did the system really not choose the show-off trait at the beginning? After a round of indiscriminate mockery of the character, the system, and even himself who had become this character, he took his hand out of his pocket. Yes, this body was indeed in the show-off pose of one hand in the pocket and then concluded. Ah, it's like a living history of the evolution of a waste material stream novel protagonist Tilda. With such a sigh, Bai Yi casually pulled open the panel. One after another, historical messages brushed past on the panel. Idle mode has been activated, character fate deduction in progress. Under the cultivation and influence of the player, your character, Shu Dong, had evolved from a weak and incompetent waste to a demon possessing a series of traits such as coldness, cunning, disguise, and insight. In the first year of your release, your character, Shu Dong, continued to play the demon game, creating the most terrifying and bizarre nightmare march in Qingnan High School. He not only sent every one of his enemies to hell, but also single-handedly increased the transfer rate of Qingnan High School, making Qingnan High School one of the countless legendary cursed schools. In the second year of your release, your character, Shu Dong, began to lose interest in the game of Qingnan High School and gradually expanded the scope to the blocks around Qingnan High School. In the third year of your release, your character, Shu Dong, entered a university in the same city and found new fun in the new school. Feeling that he was understaffed alone, he began to hide in the dark to select targets to develop wings and build an information network that fully covered the surroundings. At this point, the screen was filled with more and more text. Your character, Shu Dong, obtained a simple-minded and physically developed tool person +1 through deception. Your character, Shu Dong, obtained a smart and wise tool person +1 who knows how to judge the situation through coercion and temptation. Your character, Shu Dong, obtained a full-fledged and extremely fanatical tool person +1 through pyramid scheme preaching. Your character, Shu Dong, obtained an ambitious and very useful tool person +1 through probing and inducing. Your character, Shu Dong, successfully gathered 4 important members: heroic courage, with human limit individual strength responsible for action, wisdom of planning, who is always calm and good at making plans, fanatic follower, who regards the leader as a god and will complete the task at all costs, and untamed soul, who is ambitious and always wants to find opportunities to take over. In the fourth year of your release, your character, Shu Dong, was working hard to build a career. In the fifth year of your release, your character, Shu Dong, successfully established his own Shadow Council. With the assistance of the 4 pillars, it developed into an invisible hand hidden in the shadows, a greater evil above evil. In the 10th year of your release, your character, Shu Dong, had completely transformed into the dark side of the city. The Shadow Council, hid in the reflection of the city, unknown to anyone, but subtly influenced the fate of countless people. Restricted by the size of the Nightmare Fragment instance, your character, Shu Dong, had reached the peak and became the crownless king hidden in the deepest shadow of Dawn City. He was the top puppet master in the world, holding the line that controlled any person in the city. The scrolling historical information finally rolled to the end, and the system began to remind. The end of fate deduction has been reached. The character card has been shaped. Do you want to end the instance and extract the card? A question mark appeared above Bai Yi's head. Otherwise, not extracting the card, idling for half a day just to see the character's history of showing off. There's no need for such obvious questions. The system should learn to be more flexible. As he spoke, he had already stood on the edge of the rooftop, looking down at the brightly lit city beneath him with an appreciative gaze, and he suddenly started laughing. My answer is, of course. As his words fell, Bai Yi suddenly spread his arms. Then, without any warning, he leapt forward. His body was falling rapidly in midair. The whole world was upside down in Bai Yi's eyes, just like a reflection in the water. Then, this reflection gradually stirred up ripples. Large pieces of shattered pattern spread around. Bai Yi was like suddenly jumping into the water, instantly smashing that perfect reflection in the water. The sound of urgent raindrops came from far and near into his ears. Water vapor drifted into the room from the wide open window. Bai Yi opened his eyes in the faint smell of rainwater, and spread his palm. A phantom card fell from the sky and landed in his hand. You have obtained a special 2-star character card, Puppet Master. The characteristics of this card have been determined and cannot be modified. This card comes with a special identity, Master of the Shadow Council, inherent leadership temperament, and skills to bewitch people's hearts. This card comes with a blank special scene, Shadow Council. Currently, in addition to the chairman, 4 core members and several peripheral members can be recruited from the outside world. The chairman can give the 4 pillars template blessing to the 4 core members. Explanation. This member must have a certain fit with the 4 pillars template. After the template is blessed, the 4 pillars skill will be automatically obtained, and it can continue to improve through efforts in other ways. Is this a card that comes with its own organizational system? Bai Yi was spinning the character card at his fingertips rapidly. Just need to pull in a few more people, and an organization can be directly established. The front of the card was a blurry black fog, heavy shadows shrouded in the fog, obscuring the silhouette of the person in the fog. On the back of the card, several lines of text were arranged side by side. Puppet Master. Mysterious leader of the Shadow Council. The greatest evil above evil. Puppet Master hidden under heavy curtains. The card was spinning rapidly, the illusory brilliance flickered in midair, reflecting in Bai Yi's thoughtful eyes. He slowly curved up the corners of his mouth. When sleepiness comes, a pillow is provided. This card has suddenly given me some new inspiration. Bai Yi looked up at the heavy rain curtain outside the window, suddenly raised his palm, and threw the card out like shooting a dart. Bu tilde tilde tilde. He made a sound for himself like whistling. The card followed his intention, turned a circle in midair, and flew back. On the surface of the card that was shrouded in heavy shadows and black fog, it seemed that someone had hooked up the corner of their mouth, revealing a smile with the exact same curvature. We are currently recruiting. CNKR JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 21. The smell of disinfectant in the hospital was always so unpleasant. No matter how many times Tian Yin had been there, she could never get used to it. Especially outside the emergency room, it was always filled with the anxiety and panic of the family members, along with all kinds of prayers to gods and Buddha. However, whether she liked it or not, in her 17 years of life, more precisely, in the short span of the last 3 years, this was already the 4th time she was standing outside the hospital's emergency room waiting for results. The day when her parents went to visit the mountainous area and both encountered a mudslide. The day when the idea of adopting her was truly proposed, and her foster mother, who treated her like her own daughter, passed away. The day of the car accident not long ago. And then there was today. After returning from the police station, she did not hide anything from the two old people and laid out all the things for the first time. She could certainly disguise herself as an innocent person. She was confident that the two old people would believe her, and then, they would treat the enemy who killed their son as a loved one. Then, she would become a person like her foster father who deceived everyone with the skin of a good father and a good teacher. Therefore, Tian Yin chose to be honest about her conversation with Li Fufeng, allowing the two old people to judge for themselves. Although she did not admit anything detrimental to herself in front of Li Fufeng, the hidden meaning in her words was very obvious. When she chose to calmly repeat it in front of the two old people, instead of complaining to them about Li Fufeng's slander and telling her own grievances, the answer became even more obvious. After a bout of irrational reprimand, Mrs. Ji Yu fell first, and Mr. Ji Yu followed closely behind. So, Tian Yin appeared at the entrance of the emergency room for the fourth time. She paced back and forth in the corridor, her eyebrows furrowed. The atmosphere in the hospital was always gloomy. The smell of despair mixed with the smell of disinfectant permeated the corridor. Someone covered with a white cloth was pushed past from the side. Suddenly there was a loud cry, and the surroundings became noisy all at once. In the midst of chaos, Tian Yin suddenly walked to the end of the corridor and pushed open a window, as if she could vent out the heavy air accumulated in her chest. The sky outside the window was gloomy, and the damp rain mixed with the smell of earthy musk drifted in, suddenly assaulting her. A nurse appeared behind her with good news. The patient's condition has improved and has been transferred to the general ward 307. Family members can visit at any time. Tian Yin let out a sigh of relief, and under the guidance of the nurse, she arrived at the ward, but suddenly stopped. Her feet seemed to be glued to the ground, standing still. She didn't know if she should go in. The person lying inside was her benefactor, but she was their enemy. Perhaps they didn't want to see her. Tian Yin's gaze drifted back to the window. The rain was getting heavier. The visibility through the rain-blurred glass window was extremely low, making the buildings outside and the hurried passers-by become blurred. The whole world seemed to be soaked in water. Just then, she suddenly noticed that a flower shop had appeared across from the hospital. The decoration style of the shop was very ordinary. Similar flower shops could be found in Yuanyang City at least a dozen times. Perhaps the only thing that set it apart was that this shop had no name. The place where the sign should be was filled with clusters of fresh flowers. But Tian Yin's gaze was inexplicably attracted. At some moment, a strong thought arose in her heart. Should I go take a look? Perhaps, visiting a patient requires bringing a bouquet of fresh flowers? Not knowing whether it was an excuse to delay time to avoid visiting the sick, or from the inexplicable attraction she felt in her heart, Tian Yin unconsciously walked out. The not-so-large flower shop stood in the rain, and when she got closer, it seemed even more ordinary. Tian Yin tried to recall. She didn't seem to see this flower shop on the way to the hospital. It seemed to have popped up suddenly. However, such an ordinary shop front, being subconsciously ignored, seemed to be a matter of course. With this thought in mind, she pushed open the glass door. The ceiling, the walls, the area around the floor, were all covered with fresh flowers. All kinds of flowers seemed to come alive, all stretching their bodies in one direction. At this moment, Tian Yin felt like she had stepped into a kingdom of flowers. A person was standing in the sea of flowers with his back to her, holding a small watering can and watering an unknown flower. Hearing the noise, he turned his head and showed a smile. Welcome, fortunate guest. What can I do for you? Tian Yin's heart suddenly calmed down. All the previous anxiety, unease, worry, and trouble seemed to dissipate at the moment she saw this smile. The young shop owner had the same characteristics as this shop front. His appearance was ordinary, similar to any passerby on the street, but his smile had a kind of inexplicable affinity. It made people almost subconsciously let down all their defenses and anxieties, as if they had met an old friend they had known for many years, and had a desire to pour out all their troubles to him. His extremely affable smile seemed to tell every customer who came in that he was very willing to share their hearts with them. Tian Yin composed herself. Excuse me, do you have flowers suitable for visiting the sick? I might be going to visit two patients who may not welcome me, but I sincerely wish them to be discharged from the hospital as soon as possible. Is this the deepest wish in your heart, dear guest? What wish? Tian Yin was taken aback. Yes, every fortunate guest who comes here has a wish that has never been spoken. I believe that every flower is a special friend. A sincere wish will cultivate the most beautiful flower, giving hope and blessings to the guest. The unknown shopkeeper gave a slight smile. His soft flaxen hair draped over his eyelids, and those eyes that belonged to a young man seemed to have the gentleness and tolerance of an elder. It made anyone involuntarily believe what he said. Tian Yin blurted out without realizing it. I want to meet someone. I want to thank him in person. I also want to become a person like him, to dissolve more people's misfortunes. As soon as the words came out, she was taken aback. Even she hadn't realized that such a thought had been hidden deep in her heart all along. The shopkeeper also seemed to be taken aback. A moment of surprise flashed in his eyes. But it was only a moment, and he regained his composure. He turned around and took out a small glass bottle, at the bottom of which lay a seed that looked quite ordinary, and handed it to Tian Yin. Then, there was a card with instructions on how to cultivate the flower. On the exquisite card were only a few short lines of small print. Sunflower seeds cultivated by the flower language speaker themselves. Required fertilizer, enough devotion, sincere desire, determination at all costs, courage to take action. Other, bury it in the soil and water it. Note, this is a blessing for the brave. Tian Yin took the glass bottle. Although she felt that what was written on the card was unreliable, a mysterious seed speaking in riddles, it was like a simple and crude scam, but she inexplicably found it interesting, just like some temples would sell meaningless peace charms, often just to give people peace of mind. Perhaps this was the unique creativity of this flower shop? It must be said that in this short moment, the troubles that had originally settled in her heart had been swept away, and Tian Yin felt a sense of relief, as if she had really received some kind of blessing. She asked for the price. May I ask what the price is? Just for the shopkeeper's ability to soothe people's hearts, as long as it wasn't too expensive, she was willing to pay for this blessing. You have already paid enough. The shopkeeper raised his finger and shook it, his smile somewhat mysterious. His palm stroked a branch of flowers hanging down from the ceiling, his body slightly leaning forward, and he took a light sniff. The deep red flower suddenly bloomed even more passionately. Your sadness and troubles are the best fertilizer for these flowers. I wish you get what you wish for. Until she walked out of the flower shop, Tian Yin was still a bit dazed. Today's episode made her doubt whether she had met a weird person who spoke in riddles, but she inexplicably believed what the other person said. This trust was simply unfounded. Did I get what I wished for? She murmured, looked at the beautiful glass bottle in her palm, and couldn't help but look back. She suddenly widened her eyes. It's gone? All she could see was clearly an old hardware store. Someone was welding. The sparks flying made people dizzy. Where was the shadow of that flower shop? Tian Yin stood in place for a good while, subconsciously put the glass bottle into her pocket, and then walked towards the hospital in a daze. She had rushed out too hastily earlier without bringing an umbrella, and now the pouring rain had completely soaked her. Under the heavy night sky, vehicles were coming and going, and late returning pedestrians hurried past. Tian Yin almost bumped into someone in her daze, but luckily the other person stepped aside in time and passed by her. She quickly turned around, about to apologize. But she saw that the person was hurrying along. In the blurred vision of the heavy rain, his black clothes and black umbrella blended into the night. Only a strand of light golden hair was gently fluttering under the umbrella. Flower language speaker. Seemingly ordinary flower shop owner. Unfortunate person, I listened to your heart's voice and come. What is your wish? In the distant old city area, a hand gently flipped, and a card that turned from virtual to real in his palm was put away. Ah, what a surprise. Just routinely collecting legend degrees, and I actually found an acquaintance. He withdrew the flower language speaker, and began to control the ghost in the rainy night card he had just equipped. Bai Yi was quite surprised. When not playing games, he would occasionally equip the flower language speaker to brush up on legend degrees. Now there are already quite a few rumors about mysterious flower shops on the internet. Of course, there were also people who didn't believe it and complained about encountering a flower shop scammer and cleverly didn't fall for it. But unfortunately, they couldn't even find the shop address in the end, and the complainants naturally got a good lesson from the relevant departments. Meeting Tian Yin this time was really a coincidence. What's more coincidental was that Tian Yin's wish was actually related to him. His fingers were flexible, flipping the card quickly, just like a student who didn't listen carefully in class and doodles with a pen. Could this be called, I'm just greedy for your legend degree, but you're actually greedy for me? Bai Yi hummed the song, and finally came to a happy conclusion. Indeed, it's worthy of me. We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 22.1. Mr. Zhou, I have already transferred the rent for the second half of the year to you. Have you received it? A young woman with a beautiful face leaned against the door, intentionally or unintentionally blocking it with her body. Her face was set with a standard smile, but her brow was slightly furrowed as she glanced at the middle-aged man in front of her. Received. You're really efficient, Xiao Lu. The middle-aged man's gaze remained fixed on her, sliding from her youthful and radiant face to her body. His oily face was filled with a sly smile. I've worked with many tenants, but you, Xiao Lu, are the most trouble-free. You're young, beautiful, and capable. He chuckled twice, his face displaying an even more obsequious smile, and pounded his chest. However, Xiao Lu, you're a young girl from outside who has come to work here. You must have encountered many difficulties. You don't understand the cunning ways of people. If you have any problems, just find me. I'm local and know some people. As he spoke, he glanced casually into the half-open door, ignoring the young woman's increasingly furrowed brow. Seeing that the other party did not invite him to come in and have a cup of tea, nor did their enthusiasm for conversation remain high, the middle-aged man who had been being overly courteous finally fell silent and stepped back a few steps. That's it, Xiao Lu, I won't bother you then. Remember, if you have any problems, don't hesitate to find me. Don't be shy. He had just turned around and taken a few steps when he heard a loud bang behind him. He turned back to see the door had already closed. Paw. The man's smile suddenly disappeared. He spat a mouthful of saliva onto the ground with force, his face turning increasingly ugly. Stinky B *TCH, not appreciating the respect given. Don't know how many men have been played with, and yet looking down on me like that. Cursing all the way, he went upstairs and returned to his room, the anger in his heart burning more and more intensely. Driven by an unknown fire, whether it was anger or lust or both, the man couldn't wait to enter his bedroom and turn on his computer. The small bedroom, dining room, bathroom. Each area was captured clearly by the miniature camera, divided into different sizes on the computer screen. The young woman he had just seen appeared on the screen. Probably because she was alone at home and didn't need to be proper, she was now casually sprawled on the sofa watching TV. Her left leg was crossed, her right leg bent up, and her palms rested on her knees. Due to this position, her skirt had slid down to her waist, revealing a pair of snow-white, straight legs with no cover whatsoever. Stinky B *TCH, you look down on me. Never thought Lao Zi would be able to see you every day, watching you whenever I want, knowing every detail of your legs, including the number and shape of the moles on your thighs, right? The middle-aged man in front of the screen muttered to himself with satisfaction, leaning forward towards the screen, his eyes unblinking. As time gradually passed, the thick night slowly descended, accompanied by a downpour. The time at the bottom of the computer screen reached 8 o'clock in the evening. Noticing this, the man's eyes lit up with excitement, his Adam's apple visibly bobbing, revealing his anticipation. He had closed all the other windows on the screen, enlarging the one belonging to the bathroom to full screen. In the sound of rushing water, the generated white mist blurred the lens, the young woman's figure faintly visible. The man's face was almost pressed against the screen. His greasy, disgusting skin was like a sticky piece of butter. Just then, the entire screen suddenly went black. What's going on? The middle-aged man, who was immersed in his fantasies, had his good time interrupted. Before he could react, the screen in front of him suddenly turned blood red, as if a large amount of blood was flowing freely. And in the screen full of blood, an eye that occupied half of the screen suddenly opened. The hollow white of the eye was filled with bloodshot veins, and the pitch-black pupil stared straight at him. Ah! The middle-aged man, whose eyes were almost glued to the screen, screamed, flung the computer away with both hands, and instinctively jumped back, falling straight backwards. He fell straight off the bed. The shock of that moment sent his heart rate soaring to its peak, and he sat on the ground for more than 10 seconds, unable to recover. Thump, thump, thump. There was a rhythmic knocking at the door outside. The middle-aged man's heart, which had just calmed down, tightened again. Who is it? He forced down his panic and called out. The tightly locked door was slowly pushed open, and a shadow spread in through the gradually opening door gap. The incoming scent of rainwater made the middle-aged man shiver with cold. Good night, sir. An elegant and polite voice dispelled the eerie atmosphere. The man who stepped in shook the black umbrella he had folded in his hand, his pair of jade-colored eyes looking over with a smile. His soft, light golden hair slid down his cheeks, the ends clearly dripping with water, yet he didn't seem the least bit disheveled. Please forgive my intrusion. On this rainy night, you wouldn't coldly reject a traveler with nowhere to go, would you? On the second floor of an apartment in the old city, a hardcover notebook that looked somewhat old was spread open, revealing a page inside. Joe, male, 41 years old, makes a living by collecting rent. Garbage classification. His soul is extremely filthy, emitting disgusting spiritual fluctuations outward without realizing it. On a certain day of a certain month of a certain year, an ordinary middle school student was celebrating his junior high graduation by enjoying a meal at a newly opened restaurant nearby. He was attacked by the sudden disgusting spiritual fluctuations. Having no experience in dealing with it, he almost vomited on the spot. Not only did he nearly ruin the reputation of the restaurant and affect its business, but he also left a deep psychological shadow, causing him to stay away from this area ever since and lose his aesthetic appreciation for food, starting to learn to be self-reliant. Since then, whenever he encountered other disgusting pollution, he could maintain a normal heart and continue to eat with the disgusting smell. As long as the food I cook is bad enough, there is no factor that can make it taste worse, and I don't have to worry about affecting my appetite anymore. Super great. Cleanup status. A hand picked up the pen next to it and wrote 3 words in the last column. Cleaned up square root. Then, that hand turned to the next page. Brothers, I'm finally out. Damn it, being disciplined every day in there almost drove me crazy. Good to have you out, Brother Yao. Come on, today the brothers will welcome you back. Wash away the bad luck. A group of young men with hair dyed in various colors swarmed up, surrounding a tall young man with only a short layer of blue stubble on his forehead. The group walked down the street, attracting the nearby people to shake their heads and avoid them, their eyes full of disdain. They didn't care, walking and shouting. Brother Yao suffered a lot. Now that he's out, he needs to make up for it. We heard there are a lot of rules in the juvenile detention center. We're quite curious. How have you been these 2 years, Brother Yao? The young man called Brother Yao shrugged nonchalantly, just so. Who am I? Can they control me? They think about brainwashing me with moral education every day. They really think I buy their stuff. Anyway, I've muddled through these 2 years. I'm a good man again when I come out. His tone was very arrogant, and the young men around him all bought it, nodding and giving thumbs up. Awesome, Brother Yao. We admire you without leaning on the wall. In the compliments of the crowd, Brother Yao held his head up even more proudly, making an expression that it was nothing. By the way, he suddenly thought of something and asked, how's that lame guy? I stabbed him so many times back then, if he could save a life, it would be considered as me showing mercy. This wimp still wanted to compete with me for Yang Qingqing. Ha, I spared his life, and he didn't appreciate it, but wanted to send me to eat bullets? Funny, I wasn't even 16 at the time. The Yang Qingqing in his words was the former class flower, and also the secret crush of many young men in the group, including Brother Yao himself. Unfortunately, Yang Qingqing rejected his confession and instead got together with a nerd they always looked down upon. He happened to catch the two dating and, feeling a strong sense of humiliation, impulsively attacked. The lively crowd fell silent for a few seconds before someone finally spoke up. Brother Yao, you don't know yet, while you were in for these 2 years, just last year, that lame guy actually got into a key university in the capital, and he even chose the law department. Do you think he's funny? It's so funny it could kill me. The others also laughed along, but there was some awkwardness in their smiles. Even if they were messing around, they knew the gap between the future of a key university student and theirs. The face of Brother Yao suddenly darkened. Someone was watching his face, cautiously saying, I think that crippled guy is just waiting for you, Brother Yao, to come out. He must be holding a grudge and wants to take revenge on you. We need to be on guard. Guard against him? Brother Yao pointed at himself, suddenly snorted with disdain. What a joke. If that kid dares to trouble me, I'll cripple his other leg too. He'll become completely disabled. He made a harsh statement on the spot. The atmosphere, which had been somewhat awkward, immediately returned to its previous liveliness. Brother Yao is right. He's just a crippled guy. We're not afraid of him. Let's go. Let's first welcome Brother Yao back. I've already reserved a table at the restaurant. After dinner we'll go to the Sky Sea Bar. There's a super hot chick there recently. The colorful lights were changing, accompanied by intense dance music. The people swaying in the dance floor had blurred expressions, each face illuminated by the lights in various colors. Brother Yao, have another drink. I can't. The young man called Brother Yao felt dizzy, his entire face twisted into a knot. I drank too much at dinner, and now I'm drinking again. I really can't. He felt a storm in his stomach. He didn't care about saving face. He stood up directly, pushed the people around him away, and staggered out. I'm going to the restroom first. The corridor to the restroom was dim. The constantly changing lights made his eyes dizzy. He stumbled forward with the help of the wall, and suddenly a figure appeared in his blurred vision. Someone was walking towards him. The black umbrella in his hand was like a cane. Every step he took made a thud sound. This thud sound inexplicably made his heart beat faster. The dangerous intuition honed by his 2 years of experience in the juvenile detention center made him tense his body subconsciously, like a rabbit that had discovered a patrolling lion and hid in the bushes. However, the person in front also stopped. This stranger, who he didn't recognize, slightly lowered his head to look at the young man who had slipped and fallen on his butt due to either drunkenness or fright. A perfect curve was drawn at the corner of his mouth. Sorry to keep you waiting. I seem to have arrived late. Or perhaps, the timing is just right. Zhang, male, 16 years old, just arrested for a crime. Garbage classification. His soul was relatively filthy in nature, but extremely active and violent, long-term radiating 360 degrees of pollution to his middle school. A certain freshman who had just entered high school was tragically persecuted, at least 5 days a week under his negative ideological influence. The mind of the not-yet-adult suffered torment, the not-yet-formed worldview was impacted, almost affecting physical and mental health, choosing to violently clear him who was close to the ink. Fortunately, the positive thinking and firm worldview of a certain freshman was firm, not assimilated by his stinky soul and poor IQ, and did not do anything to ruin his future. Instead, when passing by and discovering that he had committed a serious criminal case, he transformed into an excellent citizen and actively reported. Hashtag doing good deeds without leaving a name. I speak for environmental protection. Hash. Cleaning status. Temporarily housed in a juvenile detention center, will come out to continue polluting the environment in 2 years. Do not forget to clean. The hand holding the pen drew a line under the cleaning status column and wrote 3 more words. Cleaned up square root. Xiao, female, 19 years old, sophomore. Garbage classification. Her soul was nauseating in nature, with particularly strong mental fluctuations, emitting the smell of expired rotten food, and a strong sour taste containing jealousy. Every moment, various malicious ideas to frame excellent roommates emerged. A certain innocent high school student who passed by almost got shot, becoming one of her tools to frame her roommate. On the spot, he was hit by the stench and sour taste in her soul, almost thinking that he had encountered a new type of biochemical weapon attack. In order to save the entire Yuanyang city, say no to war. In order to maintain world peace, all biochemical weapons should be cleaned. Hashtag start being a peace ambassador today. Hash. Cleaned up status. Cleaned up square root. Cleaned up status. Cleaned up square root. Cleaned up status. Cleaned up square root. The notebook was flipped page by page, and one after another trash waiting to be cleaned was marked with cleaned up square root. And a new page was turned again. We are currently recruiting CNKR JP translators. MTLERs are welcome. Discord server. https://discord.gg/hkdvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 22.2. The cries of children, the pleas of women, and the violent roars of men were mixed together to form a special symphony. For the neighbors in this building, this had become a must-listen track after every meal. Ever since the young boss who was once praised by everyone as a young talent failed in business and owed a huge debt, he would make such a noise at home every day while drowning his sorrows in alcohol. At first, they thought about persuading him, and even the police were alarmed several times. But with the woman's repeated sentence, I'm fine, and the man's repeated defense, it's just a family dispute, mind your own business, the neighbors gradually lost patience, and the police no longer came to the door. Upstairs and downstairs, they still ate, watched TV, and did homework as usual, treating the sound in their ears as special background music. Separated by a wall, they seemed to live in 2 different worlds. Only the elderly sighed a few times, day by day, why can't this life be lived well? Or sighed, old Wang is confused, his wife is also soft-eared and unclear, it's just hard for the child. Who says it's not? The 402 household, discussed behind their backs by the neighbors, were filled with a strong and pungent smell of alcohol at this time. Broken wine bottle fragments were everywhere, the electric fan kicked over on the ground was leaning against the cabinet door, and the shattered vase, a few withered flowers leaned out, the withered petals were dyed red by the blood on the ground. Stop crying, no crying. With a roar from the man like an explosion, a stool was kicked out directly, narrowly missing the crying boy, his tender arm was directly bruised. The boy's crying stopped abruptly, his little face turned pale with fright, and he began to hiccup breathlessly. The woman who was paralyzed on the ground crawled forward a few steps, shielding the trembling boy behind her. She tried to soften her voice, don't be like this, you're scaring the child. He doesn't understand, he woke you up, I'll teach him properly. Bang, another empty wine bottle was smashed on the ground. Splashing fragments scraped a bloodstain on the woman's face. She just instinctively leaned back to dodge, not caring about the injury on her face. Similar injuries, she had too many on her body already. The kid doesn't understand? He's 7 years old and still doesn't understand? The man's irritable roar echoed throughout the room. I work hard every day to entertain and do business. You can't even manage a child at home, what use are you? With every word he said, he spewed out a breath of alcohol. His flushed face was like an angry bull, pointing at the woman and cursing. Prodigal woman, a star of death for the whole family. My parents were right when they told me not to marry you. It's you who ruined my fortune. You can't do anything, you only know how to spend money. Now that my business has failed, are you planning to run away with some wild man? The room fell into a suffocating silence. The woman lowered her head and did not retort. She wanted to say that it was the man who had promised to support her and let her live without worry. She also wanted to say that she was now trying to save every penny for the family, and she wanted to say that there was no need to worry about those men who had pursued her would still like her as she was now, because even she didn't like herself. But past experience told her that retorting was useless. Choosing silence might let the other party vent their anger earlier, and after he got drunk, he might forget about it after sleeping. Endure it again. Just endure it a little longer. The woman still held a faint hope in her heart. He was just hit by the failure of his business. Sooner or later, he would return to his former self. He would become the good man who loved his wife and children again. How much he used to love her. Just endure it a little longer, endure it again. But the man was relentless. He roared, "Speak, speak," accompanied by another sound of a wine bottle shattering. The little boy huddled on the ground shuddered violently. He mustered the courage to raise his head. Mom didn't waste money, and she didn't find a wild man. I didn't mean to wake you up. Mom said you didn't eat, and let me call you to eat. His voice was small, but very clear. As he spoke, he sneakily glanced at the dining table not far away, swallowing his saliva. A table full of food was just sitting there, untouched. For the man in front of them, they had already missed mealtime. But the man who was in a rage and just wanted to vent his emotions didn't want to hear any explanation. From beginning to end, he just needed an excuse to vent. In the boy's terrified gaze, he stepped forward and flipped the table. Eat, 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 I tell you to eat. Like a pig, only knows how to eat. When you grow up, you'll still be a useless waste. Still not relieved, he lifted his foot and kicked towards the two of them. The woman tried her best to shield the child under her, silently enduring. The boy was dodging and crying silently with his mouth covered. If this room was a small kingdom, then at this moment, this man who had failed and was incompetent outside was the king who ruled the entire kingdom. When he was angry, the sky of the kingdom was filled with lightning and thunder, a typhoon passed, and the entire kingdom had to undergo a baptism of storm and rain. His subjects could only bow their heads and bear all this. No one dared to stand up to overthrow his rule. Until a rhythmic knock on the door broke everything. The man didn't want to pay attention, but the knocking sound rang again, as if it would not give up without opening the door. Who's meddling again? The angry man walked through the living room, his figure disappearing around the entrance. The mother and son curled up on the ground finally got a moment of relaxation. They got up from the ground, their eyes occasionally looking towards the entrance, like a pair of frightened birds. Mom, let's go. The boy tugged at his mother's skirt, suddenly speaking. His eyes were hopeful. He shook the skirt. When he gets drunk, let's run away together, okay? The woman turned her head back in astonishment, looking at her son. But the boy's eyes were very serious. He said in a childish voice, Mom, are you worried that you can't afford to raise me? I can beg for money. I can pick up trash to support you. Let's run away together. We don't have to worry about being beaten by bad dad anymore. The woman's lips trembled, unable to speak. Mom, don't wait for good dad anymore. Now he is bad dad. Good dad will never come back. The boy's clear eyes seemed to see through all her thoughts. In these eyes, some of her persistence in her heart finally collapsed. She gritted her teeth. Okay, Mom will take you away. The boy suddenly smiled. His curved eyes were so bright. It was a brightness that the woman hadn't seen for a long time. This made her finally firm her resolve. She looked at the entrance that was still quiet. She pushed the boy. You go back to the room first. Go to bed and sleep. I'll go and see. The woman bravely walked towards the door. She guessed it should be a kind neighbor who had held back the man. Such things had happened before, but once the person left, the man would vent more anger on her and the child. She hoped to prevent this as much as possible. Walking through the entrance, the woman with scars on her face tried to show a smile, but the smile froze the next second. She stared blankly at the man lying on the ground. He looked like he had fallen asleep after getting angry every time, but this time, a black umbrella tip pierced his heart, and blood gushed out. A hand pulled the umbrella tip out of his heart, gently propped it on the ground, and blood immediately bloomed on the ground. The woman's eyes followed the black umbrella, and finally, she looked up blankly, looking at the blonde man standing in front of the man's body, slowly shaking off the last drop of blood. His movements were as elegant and understated as if he had just finished a meal and was wiping every bit of oil from the corners of his mouth. There was an aura of indifference about him. Ah, the woman, who had finally reacted, let out a short scream. The sound had just started when it was frozen by a glance from the man. He raised a finger to his lips. Shush. Madam, please keep quiet. It's not polite to treat a guest who has braved the heavy rain and traveled a long distance in such a manner. The curve of the man's smile was as perfect as a mannequin's. The woman's teeth were chattering. She knew how terrifying this man, who could silently deal with her husband, was. At least, he was not someone she could resist, but the emotions that surged in her heart at that moment made her blurt out. Did you kill him? Did you kill him? The brutal king was finally overthrown by an even more brutal outsider, and the weak subjects finally showed some backbone. Interesting. Kay lowered his head and looked at her. His gaze was like a biologist observing a newly discovered species. It was as if he wanted to dissect her flesh, dismantle her entire structure for careful observation, making one's hair stand on end. You don't hate the man who made you live in hell every day, but instead, you hate me who indirectly saved you from hell. Even though that was not my intention. He laughed playfully and suddenly raised the umbrella in his hand. Ah, the woman instinctively crouched down and covered her head. Don't kill me. The courage she had just mustered up disappeared in an instant. We are currently recruiting. CNKR, JP translators, MTLERs are welcome. Discord server, https://discord.gg/hkbvu. Glorious God Throne. Published by Ranobes. Chapter 22.3. She suddenly remembered a rumor that had been circulating in Yuanyang City for some time. A serial killer who appeared in the rainy night, like a ghost, leaving no trace, and no one had ever seen his true face. At least those who had seen him were already dead. Could the man in front of her be the ghost from the rumors? Am I going to die? Tap, tap, tap. The blood-stained tip of the umbrella slowly tapped on the woman's shoulder 3 times, like the Grim Reaper knocking on the door, each tap making her shudder uncontrollably. Yet, he seemed to enjoy toying with people, watching them panic, fearful and anxious. Humans are truly fascinating creatures. With a perfect curve of a smile that sent chills down one's spine still hanging on his lips, Kay sighed lightly, his tone sincere. Don't worry, madam. I'm not some evil guest. He spoke as if the corpse on the ground wasn't his doing. It was a complete mockery of the dead's right to speak. The woman chose to remain silent. All along, she had been dealing with brutal oppression with a submissive and patient attitude. As long as you're not as ruthless and merciless as the gentleman lying on the ground, an outsider who accidentally came to this strange city, homeless in the middle of the night, cold and hungry, just wanting to find a place to rest, what bad intentions could he have? A quarter of an hour later, Kay sat at the dining table, sharing a late dinner with 2 other people. Although the food in the living room was overturned by the man, the woman, who had experience with this, had already prepared some in the kitchen. The woman ate without tasting, her eyes constantly darting to the man sitting across from her, and her son who was happily eating. They seemed to get along very harmoniously, as if he was a real guest visiting. This made her even more panicked. She didn't know what this man wanted to do. The unknown was always the most terrifying. The fear that lurked in her heart turned into a shadow, almost swallowing her. The boy, however, seemed to have no such worries. He asked curiously, "Are you the magic hero sent to rescue me from my bad dad? Why did you come so late?" The magic hero was a superhero-style protagonist in a popular animation that had been popular in Yao country a few years ago. He also had golden half-length hair, which looked a bit like Kay. This association left Kay stunned for a moment. He smiled. I suppose so. Now there's no bad dad, only a quiet good dad. The boy couldn't help but retort, no, he's a bad dad. But the dad who died is a good dad. The two of them were like 2 children trying to convince each other over a trivial topic, but the topic they were arguing about gave off a chilling indifference. It was as if what had died was not a person, but an ant, a flower, an insignificant little thing. The woman watched the scene in horror, as if she had stumbled into a deep, eerie nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. She wanted to scream, to resist, to wave her fists and drive this devil away, but her body seemed to be suppressed by some force, and she couldn't even lift a finger. Until the end, she saw the man stand up and put a hand on the boy's head.